Hello and welcome to the Inside the Lab weekly live Q&A or weekly live show where we discuss all things PC gaming centered around a specific topic or a specific conversation. And if you're into learning all about, how to build gaming PCs or learn more about what it takes to build a gaming PC or how to get the most out of your gaming PC, you're in the right place. And if you haven't yet, I welcome you to subscribe for more future content. And first and foremost, if you haven't yet, give a like down on the stream below. It's going to help get the message out to more people during the live show and even after the live show wraps up or concludes. And I would also like to say or give a special shout out and recognition to our replay fam. If you are watching and you are part of the replay fam, at any time that you have a question about anything discussed or mentioned throughout the duration of this live show, do feel free to drop a comment down in the comment section below. This is essentially an interactive live stream. So I also encourage those of you who are with us live to also leave any questions or comments. And most importantly, especially for the topic of this live stream or this show, feel free to add your experiences with either of these two platforms, either your current experiences or some of your past experiences. And are you on the fence about building your PC? There's also a poll in the pinned comment section at the top of the chat. So I also welcome you to take part, let your voice be heard, take part in the poll. I'm actually curious and interested to see at least everybody that's present here, because I believe the poll is only live or active for live viewers. So for those of you who are just trickling, you're going to hear me who are here with us right now. You're going to hear me repeat that often, and of course encourage other new and viewers who are just trickling in. I'm super excited, super pumped to be here, and of course have this conversation with the community really fast. Speaking of, let me jump over to the chat really quick before we jump into our warm up. Let me give a special shout out to Sparta Rules 1993. Says, "What's up, brother? It's good to see you, Anthony." And of course, WASAD moves. That's brother Cliff, formerly known as RTX On, formerly known as XLRA Gaming, currently known as WASD Moves, but we all know Brother Cliff is, of course, Brother Cliff at Sparta Rules. It's good to see you. It's good to see you, gentlemen, trickling in, of course, uh, taking part for our live show or our live stream. Again, if you haven't yet, do hit that like button for me as we jump right over into some quick housekeeping. And again, I've taken out, the merch and of course the website, because for the most part, it's there. If you're a reoccurring viewer, then it's there. And of course, I'm going to redirect all live viewers and of course replay viewers. I said of course a lot there, but I'm going to redirect our replay viewers and our live viewers down in the description box below, which all of these links for the products that will be mentioned throughout the duration of this live show can be found down there. And of course, some other links that you could support myself, support the channel with I tell you what, let's just jump right into it with the first one, of course, being our email list. Now, I did send an email out for this live stream as a test. It's something I want to do to get more eyes on the show and to also kind of boost the engagement before the show goes live. In that email, I left a call to action and welcomed you to give like the stream or share it out with your community or on your socials, as that's going to help send the right signals to YouTube to continue to push the live stream out before it airs, and believe it or not, still very much after it airs. So if that's you and you haven't yet, which I believe most of you who are here with us right now have, but I could be wrong. But if you're just now tuning in and you're like, join our list, what list? Well, this is one of the surefire ways that you could support me as a creator as I continue to grow the Inside the Lab insider or email list, and this avenue will allow me to have a direct line of communication with the community, with the audience, just in case the channel becomes compromised and we may need to reload, not so much as a reboot, but we may need to reload the channel or the brand, and of course, as I launch sister and brother channels underneath of the Inside the Lab moniker, you will be the first to know, along with any other upcoming content programming changes or content strategy changes or shifts, which I don't foresee, with the exception of channel memberships being some of the biggest upcoming shifts in the content, where I want to become more accessible for the community and just network and connect with the community in a much more deeper way, of course, while providing value in exchange for your membership. So to catch all of that funky jazz and all of those good news and all of the good news, you're going to want to sign up for our email list. Unity does start with you. Only thing I need is your email address and of course your first name, so we know where to send the content and where to call you. YouTube's notifications, they're not great. They could be better, but this, at least this way or this avenue, will allow me to have, again, a direct line of communication with the audience, with the community. If you don't get, say, the notification for a live show or a celebratory live show or live stream, like our year one anniversary live stream we did, and hopefully, fingers crossed here, there will be another live stream where I'm going to be discussing some potential changes coming to the channel. Super excited about that, but I don't want to speak on it too early because we're still about a week away from seeing that manifest. But I digress. Most importantly, sign up for our newsletter, totally free, and you can unsubscribe at any time should I be deemed unworthy to grace and bless your inbox. I normally only send about no more than 1 emails a month. That could change to maybe 2 emails a month, again, as there's a lot of interesting channel, programming and content programming coming up here as we round out what is the summer for us here in the States. And I tell you what, I normally like to squeeze this in, but you can tell me where you're watching from for the most part. I know where, we got Brother Cliff and Sparta Rules. Anthony, I know they're over the West Coast, but if I haven't had the opportunity to communicate with you or just talk with you, tell me where you're watching from, tell me what's going on in your neck of the woods. I'm over here stateside in the tri-state, what's called the tri-state area, over on the Maryland, Virginia, PA line. Let me jump back over here in the chat because I see Last Right says, I post your videos in my Discord for our PC news. We need more helpful, informative people in the PC community. You've got my support. Wow, Last Rights, truly appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing the content out to your Discord and sharing it with your community. And, you're absolutely right. We do need more helpful and informative peeps in the PC community that are just all on equal accord and just all about inclusion. And regardless of where you are, how much you have to spend, and what your interests are, you can still very much be a part of this rich community that is being a PC enthusiast or a PC gamer. But Last Rights, definitely appreciate that, for sharing the content out to your Discord. I will continue to make sure I do my best at providing just that helpful and informative content for as many people as possible. So again, thank you, and I appreciate that. And Cliff says, yep, Houston, Texas. Texas is in the house. Gotta love it. And Last Right says Manchester, Maryland. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I'm over by like Harford County, Last Rights, over here in the corner of Maryland. So awesome stuff. Manchester. Sweet. So again, our email list, if you haven't yet, sign up for it. You can find the link down in the description box below with, of course, links to our merch and our website. The merch, we have stickers for as low as $4.99 if you want to support the channel in a very small way. And of course, lab swag, much like this. The Hot Boy Summer content didn't really drop because I couldn't get the designs right or where I wanted them to be, but we still have a lot of dope fresh fire content over there in the form of the No Player in the Wild brand t-shirt, or the I know I'm a handful, that's why I got 2 hands, or the I am a PC gamer eye test, along with the plug graphic shirt. So definitely check that out as well down in the description box below. And of course the website, which is an extension of the content, right? All of the recent live streams, all of the recent videos published over on the channel, my complete entire videography, or I know it's for musicians, it's called a discography, but my entire videography is over there as well. And I just laid out a few helpful blog posts that's going to take the conversation a bit further for individuals who are unable to consume the content, say in a video format, much like our live streams or even some of our highlights, which the highlights, I just want to share with the community while everybody's here. The highlights, it's an ongoing continued experiment. In my opinion, views are hard to come by, hard to get in, period. So when you are able to, say, add to that live stream, right, the original show, with another say 40 to 50 views or over time, so long as the video or the highlight is packaged correctly, then there is some longevity, or there is some evergreen value there to be had. So it just sucks that the last highlight was from the stream. I remember I was like really sick and really stuffy, and as I went back and tried to edit it and make it a more well-rounded piece of content, I just heard myself and I said, wow, I sound so different, but still a lot of helpful information. And I've had the luxury and the opportunity of being able to help a few folks in the community who strolled by that video and had a few questions. So all sweet there. And if you haven't seen that highlight, there's a dedicated playlist over on the channel where you can check that out. And if you're not sure what the highlights are just segments and clips where I take from our live shows that are, I guess, offer the highest amount of value from the show that makes it easier to digest and consume. Previously, our shows were about 2.5, 3 hours plus long, right? And I've tried to reduce that to make the live streams a bit more compact and easier to ingest. And that way you can walk away from the content and the information presented to you in a much clearer and concise way, right? That's the digesting part of the content. Sparta Rules says Stockton, California. That's right. Sparta Rules. We built Sparta Rules PC, and I was talking to Sparta Rules before we jump into. I just want to share this. I was talking to Sparta Rules, and I told Sparta Rules, I said, you go from a 60 hertz monitor to a 165 hertz monitor. The difference is going to be day and night. And if you're unaware, we built Sparta Rules' PC, the Mini ITX X570 and 5800X with an RTX 3060 Mini ITX build we published last week. And if you haven't seen that video and you're here and you're like, wow, I really like to, I like to see what all went into that story, I highly recommend you give that video a watch. It's down in the description box below. And if you're here on the replay, it's going to be down in the pinned comment section as well. And I believe it's at the pinned comment. No, it's not at the pinned comment here. It's for you to sign up for our email list. But I highly recommend you give that one a watch. It truly is like a movie, in my opinion. I go back and I watch the raw file on my computer, and I'm just pulled right back into the story. Although I was there, although I produced the video, right? Outlined the video, recorded all of the data, edited the entire video. I just go back and I watch, and I'm like, wow, this was truly a mesmerizing experience, right? Or just a journey, even to just watch it as a viewer. So, highly recommend you give that one a watch if you haven't seen it yet. So, excuse me, we did our housekeeping. We're going to jump right over into the meat and bones of this conversation, and that's essentially Intel or AMD in 2021. Now, for the most part, they're likely, full disclaimer, let's jump ahead a little bit here. There's no right or wrong answer here, folks. What's really going to matter the most with this, when you ask yourself this question, is essentially one or two factors that will surface throughout the duration of this live show as we kind of jump through and run the course between the pros and cons for both chipset vendors. Now, you have to ask yourself, or at some point you might ask yourself, are you team red or are you team blue? Or are you a fan in the stands whose focus is getting the most for your money, or the ticket for your admission, that being, having the opportunity of experiencing games at the highest possible fidelity with uncapped frame rates or unlocked frame rates, the ability to change your graphic detail and your graphic settings? Or does your allegiance lie somewhere in between, whichever team can deliver the most performance metric or the performance you're aiming or targeting with the budget you are working with? Now, is that AMD or is that Intel? And like I said before we jumped into our warm-up, there is no true definitive answer to this question. As you will see, there are both pros and cons to both silicon vendors, which I was trying to come up with a vernacular to label them as. And I think I'm just going to go with silicon vendors. But for the most part, when we say team red or team blue, we're talking about Intel and we're talking about AMD. For the most part, those are your main two options with going, with wanting to build a gaming PC in 2021, upgrade your gaming PC in 2021. If you're content with the base core components, your case, your power supply unit, your storage, your cooling solution, maybe you're ready to jump from an older socket to a newer socket, or from AM3 over to AM4. Or you could also be looking to buy a pre-built gaming PC, right? So that is what we're discussing in this live show, while of course answering any and all of your questions along the way. And again, if you're new here, if this is your first time, I'm Terrence, your host and operator conductor of this here ride. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it, starting with the pros and the cons, right? Of, or let's just say the benefits of going with AMD. Most importantly, the pros and cons with going with AMD, because there's a good and bad to all aspects in life. There's always something positive, especially with computer hardware. Any major electronic or device purchase, whether that be an iPhone, a console, there's some pros to it, or to that device, or to that piece of hardware, and then there are some cons to that piece of hardware. But for the sakes of simplicity, we're going to keep the conversation pointed at CPUs, right? Your central processor unit, starting with AMD, right? Now, and again, if you have any your experiences, share your thoughts, share your experiences with either and both AMD or Intel. If it's something I leave out and you say, "Hey lad, my experience with AMD is this," or "I disagree with, your stance on or your statement on this," please feel free anytime jump into the conversation. That is also applicable to our replay viewers. Let us know your experiences, your victories, your losses, and your thoughts on either of these two platforms. Have you leaned little heavier on the Team Blue side in the past, and only recently with you've leaned Team Red with Ryzen? Perfectly okay. AMD is doing some fantastic things with the AM4 socket. Or have you always leaned on Intel's premium, single core performance and the stability of the say 1151 or 1151 V2 sockets, right? Do let me know in the comment section. But starting with the pros to AMD. Now, I'm going to run over each one of these and kind of left them up so you can kind of glance over and share in your thoughts on each one. Excuse me. So, starting with the AM4 socket, right? This is no brainer here. The AM4 socket has been supported for either longer than what AMD originally marketed the socket, and that's originally Ryzen 5000 was going to be left for a newer socket, for presumably the AM5 or the AM4 Plus socket. We really don't know which way in between AMD is going to go there. I really think that we can see an AM4 Plus socket with Ryzen 7000 and a newly entirely redesigned AM5 socket, which would compete with Intel's Alder Lake with newer features like DDR5, PCIe 5.0, just to name two of the biggest features coming out with LGA 1700. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that during the Intel segment. I'm not going to talk a great deal about Alder Lake. I also have a dedicated video plan to really take that conversation to the next level and talk about where will that leave 10th and 11th generation Intel CPUs, given that they're relatively young within their life cycle and still offer plenty of value, right? I stand by that. But for AMD, some of the pros to going with the AMD CPU is that the AM4 socket is widely supported by a lot of different motherboards, right? Or a lot of different motherboards with the AM4 socket support a wide range of CPUs. So this means that you can invest or plan your build for the now and in the future by going with AMD, starting with a low cost to entry CPU, right? Like a 2600 or a 1600, a premium motherboard with a lower end CPU until your needs change. Now on the AM4 socket, this could vary depending on the motherboard quite naturally, and of course you having the right BIOS or microcode to support that family of CPUs. But the AM4 socket has support to up to the 16 core for 3950X and 5950X. Should your workload demand 16 cores or 10 or more cores or 8 or more cores, which is a more flexible core count to be at for most of your general needs or general uses for your system. Rather that's just gaming, which 8 cores is a good starting point. But if you're looking to do more than just gaming, like you want to create content beyond just videos or beyond just running a YouTube channel, Maybe you want to edit videos. Maybe you want to create thumbnails. Maybe you want to capture your gameplay and upload it onto YouTube, or you want to stream them out to Twitch. Having an 8-core CPU is a good starting point to be able to do all of those things in an efficient manner. But on the AM4 socket, you can take that to the next level and say upgrade to the 5950X, starting with, say, the 5800X, which is the CPU we featured in the Mini ITX small form factor build video, right? A great, fantastic CPU for gaming. But you can take that up to the next level and go with a 3900, which is the 12-core, 24-thread Ryzen Zen 2 CPU, or the 5900, which, hang on to your butts, because that's essentially your fastest option, right? Your fastest gaming CPU, but we're going to get into all of that. But on the AM4 socket, this is one of the biggest pros to going with an AMD, a modern AMD platform right now, is that AM4 socket has it's well supported, right? Its longevity is unquestioned, unfathomable, a wide range of CPUs in different classes, to where, again, you invest in the right motherboard. You're not future proofing. Remember, you're not future proofing, but you're keeping up with the future, right? Last Right says, I am a performance over everything else guy. Yes. So is the majority of us in this community, Last Right. You're definitely in the right place, because a lot of us are the same way. Totally agree with you. Performance over everything else, right? That's going to be the reoccurring theme throughout the duration of this live show, right? Price to performance, value for your money. Last Right says, came from an Intel 9900K, the 8-core, 16-thread Coffee Lake refresh CPU. Now I'm on the AMD 5950X, which is, the 16 core, 32 thread Zen 3 CPU. Always target whoever is best of the best each generation. My focus is typically 75% gaming, 25% productivity. And I totally agree, especially when you said always target whoever's best of the best each generation. I'll take it a step further, and one piece of advice that I recommend, even for users who are looking to, say, to buy a pre-built gaming PC, right? I tell them, always try to target the fastest CPU for your money of that generation, right? So for your example, at the time the 9900K launch, that was the fastest on the LGA 1151 V2 socket. The 9900K before 10th gen came with the 10900K. That was the fastest CPU of that generation, right? Of that time. And if one had the spin at the time, I would recommend, say, hey, go with the 9900K. It's the fastest gaming CPU for not just gaming, but also productivity, as Last Rice said. 75% gaming, 25% productivity. That's a good ratio to be at, if, yes, you plan on doing more than just gaming with your system. If you plan on starting out, say, yeah, I just want to play some games. I don't want to, stream. I just want to casually play some games, and flip that metric and invest that, put your money and your budget in other areas that's going to enhance your experience. TMZ says, hello to everyone. It's good to see you. TMZ, welcome, welcome, welcome. WASD says, back having internet issues today. Yeah, man, that sucks. I wonder, is it have anything to do with the drought you guys are experiencing over there? I was reading up on that, Cliff. It definitely sucks what you guys are going through, man. Poor Texans. My heart goes out to my fellow Texans, my brothers and sisters out there in Texas. I also have a cousin that lives in Texas. But yeah, TMZ, is good to see you, TMZ. And I welcome you and everybody else who's just now joining into. At any point, feel free to share your experiences with both Team Red and Team Blue. As the title implies, we're discussing which one is the viable option for your gaming needs in 2021. I started the live show out by saying that there is no definitive right or wrong answer, but what should be that deciding factor is what we're going to come to. So Cliff says, I don't know, man, maybe just a hairball. Wow, it's like the last live stream where it just cut out. I don't know if the issue was on my ISP, or was that on YouTube's end, or it could have been both, but it was totally weird. I never even seen that over on the back end when it kicked me off of the live stream just without warning. I got a subtle message, and it was just like, bloop, just kicked me off. But nonetheless, we are rocking and rolling and discussing Intel or AMD for your gaming needs in 2021. We're talking about the AM4 socket where we are right now in the pros and cons to going with an AMD, build or going with AMD as your silicon vendor. And we were talking about the AM4 socket. Now we're going to migrate down to the aspect that AMD typically offers better value for your money. It's kind of like last rights I mentioned about switching from a 9900K to a 5950X, right? Now the 5950X is not a cheap CPU. It's about $800 MSRP, and I think even right now it's pushing towards 1,000. I could be wrong, but I do believe right now it's between $800 to $900. So it's not, it's not a consumer friendly chip by any means, right? It is an enthusiast chip, which will likely require some form of exotic cooling or a beefy cooling solution. I tell you what, last rights, tell us what you're using to cool your 5950X over in the chat. As TMZ says, performance per dollar. Got to give to AMD. Yes, absolutely. Performance for when it comes down to performance per dollar. And let me switch back here again. Hot sauce fire. But I had a rough and rugged formula that breaks down essentially how much you pay per frame, to where if the 5900X and the 11900K both had an average FPS output, say across 8 games, of about 122 FPS, right? About 122 FPS. Well, the 5900X costs about the same as the 11900K, but is significantly faster. So the value for your money, because the 11900K costs more than the 5900X right now, wasn't the case at launch, but right now. So you break that down with performance per dollar, you are spending less on AMD side for more performance versus paying more over on Intel side for less performance. It's the performance per dollar, and yes, that definitely, we got to give that to AMD. It's one of the reasons that inspired me again to jump over and push the good message that is Ryzen as a CPU platform, right? Versus the alternative at the time, which was 7th generation 7700K, which was over $400, still between $350 to $400 still at Zen launch, when Zen launched with the 1600X and the 1600 and the 1700X and the 1800X. IPC wasn't there, but when it came to performance per dollar, Ryzen came out the gate swinging, and this is what made it such an intriguing, captivating option at that time. And while the AM4 socket still continues to dominate to this day, and that's because of the price to performance, the price per dollar that Ryzen has to offer. It's insane. Can't go wrong. Last Rice says Ice Giant Pro Siphon Elite. Is that an AIO? Pardon my ignorance, but is that not familiar with the brand? Okay, cool. Yeah. Is that an AIO, or is that a? It says the great cooler for heavy multi-core, runs at 65 to 60 AC. That's definitely water under a full load. Nice. And that's it. I mean, what are your boost clocks like too, Last Rights, on that 16 core? Are you getting like 4.5 on 8 cores, 10 cores, and then maybe like 3.5, 3.7 on the other 8 cores? Do let us know. But we're going to jump right back here as we're on the topic of AMD continuing going with the value for money argument. And yeah, we've got to give that to AMD. When you're going with an AMD CPU, chances are you're going to get the most value for your money, the best price to performance or value for your dollar out of the chips, regardless of the family or line of CPUs you're in. That could be all the way down to the Ryzen 3. Last Price is a huge dual tower. It is an air cooler, believe it or not, but it's huge. Ah, okay, gotcha. So that makes up for. So having that beefy heatsink helps keep temps under control. Because 65, 60 AC under a full load, that's quite impressive. Awesome stuff. Which, speaking of AMD, I know it says newer architecture, but I obviously with the Zen architecture, it is a newer architecture, and Zen 3 had brought more and more features over with the chipset. But most importantly, one of the underrated pros to going with an AMD CPU right now in 2021, speaking of coolers, is that they're rising all the way up to the 3800X, right? Their CPUs come with a cooler, and that could help you save money on other components, or you could very much still add to that, right? Because the coolers that come with the Ryzen lineup of CPUs are about 65 watts. They're rated for about 65 watts. So while you won't be able to do any aggressive overclocking, you still should be able to take advantage of PBO and PBO2. I've seen this with nearly every Ryzen cooler I've used here in the past, which some of you can find in the older parts of the catalog, where we reviewed the 1600X and we did the build with the 2600X. But having an air cooler can help you save on your initial investment, freeing up the space for a sorry, this daggone fly is bothering me, but you can add to other areas of your system. And even if you wanted to fully take advantage of higher overclocks or higher boost clock frequencies or stable temperatures or low temperatures, then a $40 air cooler, aftermarket air cooler, could still very much get the job done. Somewhere with a TDP rating of over 150 watts could still very much get the job done. Now, put this in your back pocket, because 10th generation i5 and up doesn't come with a CPU cooler at all. So just keep that in mind as we talk about the best value for your money. It extends beyond just performance, right? It extends beyond just performance. That also is included with the fact that their CPUs come with the cooler, come with a well capable cooler. So that right there is passing down even more value for your money. If that CPU costs $160 or $170 and it comes with the cooler, then this benefits you as a consumer because you're getting more value for your money. The newer architecture, the Zen 3 architecture, it's come with new features like smart access memory and better support for fidelity super resolution, FSR. That's AMD's version of DLSS and ray tracing. But man, you could really save some money by going with an AMD CPU because their CPUs come with a cooler. Okay, and depending on which CPU, the cooler is not all that bad. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So let's segue over into the cons to going with AMD, because you got to take the good with the bad, and yeah, put the baby out with the bathwater. But you got to take the good with the bad in all things in life. So starting with the first con, and that is here as of recently, AMD's latest and greatest, or their fastest CPUs for gaming and productivity, has creeped over on the more expensive side, right? We've seen this with Ryzen 3000 with the 3900X and the 3950X creeping up past that $500 and $600 market cap or target, and that's incredibly high given that these are consumer grade CPUs. They're not high end desktop or HED. They're not in that consumer group. These are consumer based CPUs, and that is that's a lot of money for a CPU depending on what it is you're trying to do. So the value kind of starts to diminish at that point, as you can get a CPU that costs probably a third of the 5900X and even the 5950X and still have a machine that can deliver the performance that you are targeting, right? Especially at 1080p. If you're just gaming, you don't need a CPU with any more than, I would say, in my honest opinion, depending on the game, 8 cores, good starting point. 6, even better if you are just starting out your journey with wanting to build a PC, right? You don't need the 5900X to accomplish decent FPS, gaming at a high fidelity and high resolution. It really should also start with your graphics card of choice on what you're going to pair with that CPU. But here, as of lately, AMD's latest and greatest has edged on the little expensive side. Cliff says they don't want to be seen as the budget brand anymore, and you're absolutely right. And you remember, Cliff, let me switch back here because that's something we had talked about a few live streams back, guys and gals. We talked about that a while back. If we said, you know what, AMD is shifting, and I believe it was right around the Zen 3 launch or right around the Ryzen 5000 launch, And we said AMD no longer wants to be viewed as the budget alternative anymore. They want to compete in the higher end space. They want to compete with Intel's fastest gaming CPUs with multiple cores and high boost clock frequencies, and they're willing to, charge the premium to do so. Now, so long as they can continue to add value, somehow, some way, they can continue to shine with those higher end SKUs. Because as you see, as we switch back here, there's also limited availability on those higher end SKUs. I checked before the live stream, as I normally do when I'm making these claims and statements. The 5900X can, it can be had. They're available between a Micro Center and Amazon. Limited quantities though, very much still. But the 5950X still a rarity, still a little hard to find. Excuse me, at its MSRP. Now, the 5900X by AMD standards is touted as its fastest gaming CPU. Right? This is by AMD standards. The 5900X is the fastest gaming CPU right now on the market. Of course, until perhaps Alder Lake pops up with the 11900K still trailing behind the 5900X, which again is insane given that the 5900X has 12 cores and 24 threads, but still enough single core performance to drive high frames at 1080p, and of course keep up with even some of the fastest GPUs over on the RTX 30 series side and the RX 6000 series side. And TMZ says, yep, 100%, they don't need to. Right, he says AMD doesn't need to be viewed as the budget brand anymore. Right, and I concur because I don't think they need to be viewed as the budget brand simply because their products are competing with a arguably superior product over on the Intel side. So if it performs more, it should cost more, right? That's my logic behind, especially with PC hardware. If it costs more, it should perform more, right? And so long as AMD can continue to outperform their competition, I really don't see the issue with them charging more for the competition. They don't want to go backwards. We want them to continue to have the R&D spend to continue to enhance the Zen architecture, or to bring in new features with AM5, like support for DDR4 and DDR5 motherboards, PCIe 5.0, faster storage, bandwidth, all of those features. We want those things. So, can AMD excel by being just the budget brand offering? Are we content with just budget options at the CPU level? Because in my opinion, if you have the budget to opt for a faster CPU, say over on Intel side, if AMD managed or maintained that budget brand persona, if you had the spend to go with the faster option, chances are you're going to go with the faster option. You're not going to, hinder your experience or your performance on your machine. If you have $500 to spend on a CPU and the faster gaming CPU costs $499, but AMD's offering costs you, $389, you can save a little bit of money. No, you should still go with the fastest option. It's much like what Last Right said, and what I piggybacked off of, buying the fastest CPU for that generation and the fastest CPU for your money. But right now, a con with going with AMD right now in 2021 is that there's limited availability on those, CPUs that are deemed the fastest for gaming. So if your budget was, you had a ceiling of about $600 and you're targeting the fastest gaming CPU because that's your goal, you want the fastest CPU with the strongest single core performance, then you would likely be in the ballpark of the 5900X. And if your workload was even 60-40 gaming and productivity, right? So something to that extent to where if you're not gaming, chances are extremely high that you are in some form of productivity workload, then your option would be the 5950X, right? With 10th generation, you do cap out at with the 10900K at 10 cores and 20 threads. 11th generation CPUs currently only top out at 8 cores, 16 threads. So if your workload even demanded more than 10 cores, then again, you'd be in a ballpark or targeting the 5950X. Limited availability may have you waiting, overpaying over on eBay, because if it's not on Amazon and it's not at your local micro center, then chances are it's over on eBay being sold for about 50-60% more. No, that's graphics cards. CPUs, it's not as bad. The situation isn't as bad as it was about 4 or 5 months ago. If you remember, the situation was really bad with the Zen lineup of CPUs. When they launched, I did a video on it. That video actually performed better than I thought it would, given the subject matter. But watch that video for a little bit of history to see what the prices were like when the 5600X and the 5800X launched. The 5600X was selling for about $500-$600. The 5800X was about $1,000. It was insane. It was pandemonium. It was chaos everywhere. But let me get caught up in the chat here really fast. WASD Cliff says a vast portion of the market goes where the value is. They don't care who's the best. Whatever brand fills that market, they will go with. Right. And you know, here with the advent of the Zen architecture, that has been AMD. FTW for the win, hands down, man down. You're absolutely right. A good portion of the market that even I like to target with the content here in this community, a good portion of that market doesn't necessarily want, you know, the best. They want the value. They want to get the most out of their money, right? The most performance they possibly can with their money out of their hardware. If that's a build with 900, say a $900 build, pre-Techdemic, bear with me now, pre-Techdemic, you could build a well competent machine at a $900 budget. One would argue that you still could now. You may need to work your way through the GPU market though to get it under $1,000, because in the live stream we did, where we built a complete setup, where we configured an entire setup, your monitor, your keyboard, your mouse, your audio, your network solution, all of those things. The total system came to about $1,400 with the base system, or just your PC alone, came to about $1,000. And this was manageable with a $1,000 pre-built and a $1,000 DIY or custom build, saving about $400 to $500 for a dedicated GPU. You are going to overpay for a graphics card, okay? If you build right now, that's just the reality of it. That is the premium tax we talked about in a few previous live shows. You are going to pay about 50% more than you should. But what you are getting is that graphics card being available. All right, that is the value in it. Not so much as what you're going to get in terms of FPS output, because RX 570s, RX 580s, GTX 1060s, GTX 1070s, 2060s, 1660 Supers, 1660 Ti's, and even 1650 Supers are all still selling for well over 50 to 60% than what they are worth when we are talking about used graphics cards, right? When we are talking about used graphics cards, we aren't looking at MSRP. We're looking at what their value is and relevant to what's available or what would be available on the new market, right? A GTX 970 isn't worth $250, $300, but this is what they're selling for on average, simply because there are no available GPUs at that price category, right? Under $300. So you have to scale it back almost 3 generations to get a capable 1080p GPU, which is definitely going, and any 9 series graphics card is going to likely put you in a hefty spot. Just if you're on that path, just make sure your graphics card will be fast enough for whatever modern CPU you're going with, if you're going with a modern CPU. But sorry, rant over, but totally agree. Vast portion of the market, they go where the value is. Absolutely. And Last Ride says, oh yeah, you asked about boost. I get 4.6 on long multi-core loads and 4.8 to 5 in games. The Ice Giant Strafe is in multi-core because it's thermosiphon. The more heat, the faster the heat transfer. Thermosiphon, I'm sorry. The more heat, the faster the heat transfer. Yeah, and that's so crucial to sustaining high clock speeds like that, is getting that heat off and away from the IHS and the heat, the radiator of your cooler. Awesome stuff. That's incredible, man. I love that CPU. Cliff says they went with what their budget could do, not with what was best. So are you talking about just people in general? I see I missed your comment where you said a lot of people It's what, but well, according to a lot of people, it's what budget took them to AMD. So if someone else offers better budget, they will lose it. Ah, okay, I see. And you said they went with their budget could do, not with what was the best. And that needs to be on a T-shirt. Sorry if that was unpleasant, but that needs to be on a T-shirt because yes, it's so important that you go with what's best for your budget. And a little bit of foreshadowing here. Don't dip out because I'm about to tell you the biggest secret here to piggyback off of what Cliff is saying, or WASAD, and that's the biggest deciding factor and what team is right for your needs. Remember, it's always about your individual needs. Is your budget or your wallet, your bank account, because most people don't, use carry wallets. Yeah, whatever. But for the most part, your money comes out of your bank account. Okay, so you are essentially rooting for your bank account or what's best for your budget, because keeping that and keeping your initial investment low, excuse me, if your build is planned properly, keeping your initial investment low and sticking to whatever your current needs are could help minimize that impact, right? To building your machine, not thinking that it's too expensive to do because, oh, I need a graphics card, and this tech tuber says I should have, I need at least 8 cores, or I should have an AIO or a liquid cooler. I need to use an SSD, or I should use an M.2, or I need a 800 watt power supply unit or a 1,000 watt power supply unit. I can't get a graphics card. Which graphics card should I get? It really boils down to what your needs are. We're going to talk about that a little bit further, so I don't want to dive into it as I have a dedicated segment for that, but totally agree. And Last Right says, I am using custom PBO settings to hit those clocks. Definitely check out the Ice Giant if you haven't seen it. I've seen people cool 3990X, that's the Threadripper with 650 plus watts, going through it and keeping them under 90C at that wattage, which is insane. Yeah, and the 3990X, that's the 32. Is that the 32 core 64 thread Threadripper CPU? Could be wrong. It's either the 32 or the 64. I think the WRX is the 64. I think that's the 32 core 64 thread, and that's an insane amount of cores to cool at a sustained full multi-core load. Absolutely, as Cliff says, it's a cool kit. Last Right's very neat. I'll read up on it after the live show. Thanks for sharing, no Last Rights. Love it. So let's switch back here as we see we had a few more people join in. If you're just now joining us, welcome to the weekly Inside the Lab Q&A show, what we like to call the live experience, as we're discussing Intel or AMD in 2021, which one is right for you, or which silicone vendor is right for your needs. Again, we have a poll over in the pinned comment that I welcome you to, chime in and share your thoughts on what platform you are using, or let me know if you say, hey, I don't even have a CPU lab. I want to get into PC gaming. I don't know how to get into PC gaming. I'm saving up to get into PC gaming. Wherever you are in your journey, you are in the right place. Just remember to hit that like button for me on your way in or on your way out if you are unable to stay for the full duration of the live show. I appreciate you a great deal either way. But so we talked about AMD, how their latest and greatest CPUs a little bit more expensive. They've shifted away from the budget brand persona that they have held for a long time up until this point now, arguably with the Ryzen 3000 series, which was a well-rounded launch in my opinion. Still a lot of value in the Ryzen 3000, especially if you could find a used bundle over on the used market. But one of the other cons to going with an AMD CPU is that it uses a PGA design. So it uses a pin grid array design, which is the needles on the back of the CPU. As you can see here in the graphic illustration, there are, if you haven't handled an AMD CPU, right, even if it's on the AM3 socket, because they are very much uses the same PGA design array, or PGA design. Darn it, I know I know I said I was going to do it, fam, but so when you are installing an AMD CPU, this is one of the most talked about moments of the whole entire process, and that is how you handle that AMD CPU with those delicate pins, because a half an inch drop, a 1 inch drop, right? Just a scrape, or you're clumsy during the whole entire process. One bent pin, holy cow, can likely leave you with having to buy another CPU. This is if it's caused by build error, or if you are servicing your system. And we talked about this in last week's live stream. Let me switch back here, but we talked about how the method I use to remove CPU coolers off of off of motherboards that haven't been turned on in a while. Say the thermal paste is dried up and I need to loosen it. Cliff had made a few recommendations. We talked about using a heat gun if you're unable to get the system to turn on, if there's like power issues and it won't boot up at all, or if it turns on and immediately shuts down and you can't get the CPU cooler off. With instead of pulling up, try to just uninstall the motherboard altogether, take the whole thing out, unscrew the CPU cooler, and lean the motherboard upside down. After you've either found a way to loosen up the thermal paste by applying indirect heat. Remember I told you hit the four corners. If you got kids, hit the four corners like the game they like to play. If you don't have kids and you haven't played it, it's a pretty dope game. You got one person staying. I don't know why. This is so off subject, but it's a fun game. If you have kids or nieces and nephews and you want to try to play it with them, one person stands in the center of a room or field or area blindfolded and just run to each corner and they call out the corner. Last person in the corner that didn't get called wins. It's pretty fun. But I digress. You apply the heat gun to four corners, loosen up the thermal paste, turn the motherboard upside down, just let gravity have the CPU cooler fall down. Don't pull up, because if you pull up with too much force, chances are you can pull that AMD CPU out of the socket. And depending on if it's a left to right pull, or say the thermal paste might have loosened and instead of pulling right up you turn the cooler and then lift it up, that's no good for the pins, fam, that's inside the socket. And that's a surefire way to find yourself looking at the CPU cooler with the CPU still mounted onto it after you removed it from the socket. Not a good sign. So what I recommend is, if you can't get the computer turned on, right, to loosen up the thermal paste, stand 3 to 4 inches with a hair dryer, right, or some type of heat gun. Stand about 3 to 4 inches away from the socket, and about 20-30 second intervals, just point the hot air down towards the socket. And what that's going to do is just going to loosen up the thermal paste. It's going to make it a little easier for that cooler to just kind of melt off of the IHS without you having to apply, say, vertical force. Is what I don't recommend, is applying vertical force. And Cliff says stability is a hard nail. It's hard to nail down until it affects you. Then it's a pain in the behind. Ryzen memory compatibility is much better. Know that those first gen Ryzen memories were headaches. Yeah, first generation Ryzen, the integrated memory controllers were not that great, and I really think AMD knew this prior to the launch. And it's one of the reasons why we got Zen Plus, and Zen Plus wasn't really Zen 2, because we had got a new chipset with Zen Plus, and that improved the memory issue. But yeah, and I experienced this with I was an early adopter. I had a Ryzen 5 1600X, one of my favorite CPUs. It's actually used in Mrs. Mod's system right now on a B450 motherboard, and we did a video on it. You could check that out. But yeah, first generation Ryzen had some serious memory headaches, and at one point, not even 2933 megahertz, 2933 megahertz in terms of a rated speed would give you system stability. You had to dial it down to about 2666 megahertz, with a large portion of the tech community realizing how that was hindering performance, how that was slowing down the system FPS output and system responsiveness. So they fixed this with Zen Plus and the 400 series chipset, but it still could be very much better, as AMD themselves recommend Ryzen CPUs are at their best with 3200 megahertz kits. With anything past that will rely on the CPU itself, because when you're overclocking RAM, it's in a 1:1 ratio with your CPU frequency. So just something to keep in mind. And Cliff says, I can't tell you how many posts I've seen by first-time builders changing their stock cooler only to bend their pins. I see it over and over. I don't think you can necessarily blame AMD about that. But yeah, and that's why I chalked it up to builder error. And an experienced builder hopefully will know what to look for, how to properly pull that CPU. But Cliff, I totally agree. I've talked to users who say everything was working perfectly fine before I replaced my CPU cooler. I installed, I got a new air cooler, or I switched over to an AIO. can you help me? My system's just turning on, or it's just I'm just getting a black screen. Something went wrong. And after making sure all other possibilities have been covered, I recommend saying unmount your CPU, remount your CPU. And before you remount it, take a flashlight and make sure there are no bent pins. Okay? Because even one bent pin can leave you with a system that'll just you'll be met with a black screen. But I don't think that can necessarily be blamed on AMD either. But I did read an article that pointed out that AMD is looking to move away from the pin grid array design and something that where the pins are on the motherboard, right? Much like Intel's LGA line grid array, where the pins are on the socket and not the CPU. So this is something that AMD is looking to move to, that I think either with the AM4 Plus socket, and if not the AM4 Plus socket, definitely the AM5 socket, which would be a totally redesigned socket, which AMD would then put the pins on the socket of the motherboards, leaving you to be careful to not damage the pins on the motherboard, just like Intel, right? So if you're buying a used Intel motherboard, do make sure to check that there are no bent pins on the socket. But yeah, totally agree. But switch it back over here to AMD and its PGA design. Installation can be intimidating because, yeah, the pins bend easily. And so this is something that could cause you anxiety while you're building if you're not getting, say there's something wrong with your input output headers being installed in the improper pins, right? Let's say you got the positive or the negative is, and vice versa, and your system's not turning on. You go to hit power, you're like, oh man, did I damage something? Something's wrong. Or you fix that and you're still met with the black screen, but then it's, maybe you plugged your HDMI cord in the back of the motherboard, not the graphics card, or maybe your graphics card needs to be reseated. It can cause anxiety even after you've maybe fixed one of those issues and you're able to jump into the BIOS. And if you're not, then you might be looking at the possibility of having to buy another CPU to complete your build. So that that process, or that part of the process, could be super intimidating, and that's largely because even if you drop the CPU, just installing, I wish I had an AMD CPU. I have one right here in the socket. Hold on, fam. Let me see if I can pull out this old Phenom CPU. And this CPU has bent pins. Let me see if I can switch back here, because this CPU has bent pins. And I don't know if you can, it's not going to, alright, so it's not going to focus well enough. You won't be able to see it. But these pins, even if you drop this, an AMD CPU with the pins on the back of the CPU here, about a 1 to 2 inch fall down into the socket will be enough to possibly bend or shift some of the pins to where when you go to install it on your socket, they may shift in a position that it's unnatural to the pin, and it will cause it to bend even more, or bend other pins. I've watched tech tubers, my guy Brian over at Tech Yes City, I've watched him do a video where he bent pins back on some CPUs that were sent into him by members of his audience, and it just looked like an utter waste of time to me, because there's no guarantee, surefire, there's no guaranteed method of doing it to ensure that the CPU is going to function again. Matter of fact, it's not even guaranteed that it will function again. You could bend the pins back and it could still be in a disturbed state to where the CPU just won't function as it should. You can even bend the pins back, be able to jump into the BIOS, but maybe say as soon as your CPU goes under load, your system could be met with the blue screen. There are all types of possibilities that goes with damaging your AMD CPU, and it's one of the reasons why most builders, or most inexperienced builders, like Cliff mentioned, build or don't respect the delicacy of these pins, and they end up damaging it during the upgrade process or during the build process. Let me switch that back in there. There's a story behind that CPU. Maybe one day I'll do a talking head video on it, but there's a story behind that CPU. But those are the cons to going with AMD. Jumping back onto the subject here. Those are the cons to going with AMD. They're latest and greatest, a little on the expensive side. We're not necessarily saying this is a bad thing, But to gamers who are looking to make a modest splash, even say with a sub $200 CPU, that won't even be Ryzen 5000. Currently, you're going to have to go a previous generation to get a Ryzen CPU under $200. So their latest and greatest, little on the expensive side. This is to be expected as they no longer, AMD wants to change their brand image to offering high performance gaming CPUs and productivity CPUs. But as the second con implies, that there are limited availability on those high-end Ryzen SKUs or the Ryzen 9 SKUs. And by the time stock does normalize, we are likely, since we haven't gotten Ryzen 5000 Pro line CPUs, um, this could change with either 6000 or 7000 series Ryzen CPUs, and you could be looking at a 7950X or a 7900, which is weird because Intel has a 7900X, the 7900K, but or 7900X. So we're not really sure what AMD is going to go with their naming scheme for Zen 4, but you're going to be looking at a generational leap in performance over the next generation. So by the time stock improves, you might want to consider going with a newer alternative should the price be there for you. And then we talked about one of the other cons, or the last con, was the fact that AMD uses a pin grid array design, and this, is easy to bend the pins during installation or during upgrading your components, whether that's removing your CPU cooler, it always starts there. Even if you're upgrading your cooler or you're upgrading your previous, let's say you got a 3600 and you're ready to make that generational performance leap I just mentioned over to a 5600X or a 5800, you're going to have to pull that bad boy out, which still has some value. You could take that CPU, flip it on the used market for about $149, $139, so long as you don't bend any pins, and it makes that upgrade over to the next generation a whole lot more feasible, right? It makes that impact a whole lot less impactful. Let me take a sip here. Last Right says, the Cliff, yeah, some 5000 series chips don't like anything over 3600 megahertz unless the kit has a Ryzen approved XMP profile. Yes, absolutely. And even when I'm consulting enthusiasts who are looking to splash on a fast kit, I tell them that anything essentially past 3200 megahertz will require a physical manual overclock. On a XMP profile of 3400 megahertz, depending on the board and if the memory is on the motherboard's memory list, then you can maybe pull it off. But chances are you're almost definitely going to have to tweak the voltage running it past 3200 megahertz and ensure that your CPU is overclocked as well. And Last Right says it's a massive improvement over Zen/Zen 2, and that's why one of the pros was that newer architecture that Ryzen has positioned us with, with the Zen 3 architecture. The newer architecture brought a 19% performance of IPC, a 19% IPC performance uplift, and that's incredible given that the 5600X was originally going for what, $349, somewhere to that extent, and the 5600X under $300. They're coming back with that best price to performance value for your money, although they are slightly starting to skew over to the high end. Now, speaking of scooting over to the high end, we talked about the pros and cons to going with AMD. Now, just to give some of Lab's recommendations, and again, all of these links you can find down in the description box below, but the best overall Ryzen SKU to go with would be the Ryzen 5 5600X. That's the 6-core 12-thread Zen 3 architecture based CPU. Now, these prices could vary depending on your locality or your neck of the woods, of course, with tax and other costs associated with it. But if you're able to traverse to a micro center, you could really save some money by going with these CPUs. But the best overall AMD CPU to go with right now in 2021, the best overall would be the 5600X, simply because it has a $260 price point, right? 6-core 12-thread high boost clock frequency, that 90% IPC uplift over the previous generation, right? Then you have the best value, right? Best value. Doesn't make it the fastest, doesn't make it the best overall, but the best value-centric CPU. Let's scale it back 2 generations, all the way to the Ryzen 5 2600 that, yes, to right now, that's a $170 to $169 CPU that can be had even at the new price point over on Amazon. All of these links you can find, again, to these products are down in the description box below. If you are here on the replay and you're interested in learning more about these CPUs, or if you're here now and you're interested in upgrading to a newer platform. All right, which for the most part, most of you, I know what your system, what your configuration is for the most of you that are here right now. And last right says a big factor in dual rank DIMMs for Zen 3. If you got 2 sticks, you want to get dual rank sticks. If you got 4 sticks, dual/single rank won't matter as much. Yes, absolutely. And even then, it's good to look at your motherboard's manual to see what the proper, what the allotted DIMM speeds will be going with dual versus single versus, all 4 going quad, if you will. And Cliff says Ryzen 5 2600 is what my daughter's PC has. It's been great for her. Yes, it's the best value-oriented CPU on the market right now at $169. This is new price to performance, y'all. This is that new price to performance. Take your Ryzen 5 2600, right? I keep saying right. I got to stop doing that. But take your Ryzen 5 2600, B450 motherboard or a B550 motherboard if it's compatible, or even an X570 motherboard. Invest in your motherboard for the future. But for the best value centric CPU, right now that's the 2600 or even the 2600X if you can get one for still under $200. Over on the used market, I've been seeing bundle deals with 2600s and B450 motherboards and at a price point of about under $250, depending on what the board is, how premium the motherboard is. That's incredible value, given that that leaves you with enough money to put towards getting a dedicated graphics card, a decent dedicated graphics card. So you pair this with a $100 B400 series motherboard, right, or an X400 series motherboard, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. That's about a $350 to $400 total. And if you were targeting a system at, let's say, about $900, $1,000, you can bend at other areas with your build to be able to accomplish that amount. If that's truly the budget you're working with, right? As Cliff says, it's great for my daughter's PC. This CPU has 6 cores, 12 threads as well. A boost clock frequency, I want to say up to 4.2 gigahertz. It's slightly faster than what the 1600X was, and the 1600 was able to do, which all the ones I work with and touch all topped out at 4 gigahertz. I tried to push them past that, and it just would not, it just could not go down that way. It just was not trying to happen. But $170, and it comes with the CPU cooler. So again, you don't have to worry about investing in your CPU cooler off the bat with going with the Ryzen 5 2600. That's something you can make down the road. That's an investment, a performance level, a performance enhancing upgrade you can make down the road. And then you have your fastest CPU for gaming, and that's the Ryzen 9 5900X. So if you had the spend and you wanted to go beyond that, and you say, you know what, nope, I want a non-compromising, I want the fastest possible gaming CPU. What's it going to cost me? I have about $600 to work with. Can I get the fastest possible gaming CPU? In my opinion, you not only will get the fastest possible CPU for gaming, but arguably one of the, at that price point, a CPU that's going to be able to get the job done in your productivity workloads as well, right? With its 12 cores. 4 cores, 8 threads less than the 5950X, but you have to ask yourself, am I willing to pay about $250 more for those extra 4 cores and 8 threads? Remember, it comes down to what your specific needs are. If those extra 4 cores and 8 threads are going to help enhance your streams, enhance the quality of your games, or your encoding times, or your render times, or your video, then that extra $250 could be money well spent for your needs. If not, if maybe you're just interested in streaming Twitch, capturing some gameplay, and editing them out in Adobe Premiere or DaVinci Resolve, then 12 cores, 24 threads at that price point will get the job done. So these are my 3 basic recommendations. Again, best overall CPU over on Ryzen 5 Labs recommendations. I got to give that to the 5600X. It's under, I believe these prices are between Amazon and Micro Center over here in Maryland. But you can subtract about $30 to $40 on each one, and that's what you would see over on Amazon from doing my market research. But I can tell you now, best overall goes to Ryzen 5 5600X with its 6 cores, 12 threads, under $300, 19% IPC uplift over the previous generations. It's going neck and neck, trading blows with like the 11700K with 2 less cores and 4 less threads. The best value oriented CPU, like the best value for your money, especially if you were looking for a chip under $200 right now. Again, the 6 core, 12 thread, another octa-core, yeah, hexacore, whatever. 6 core, 12 thread. I ain't great at math, y'all. 6 core, 12 thread CPU, $170. Great price to performance, high boost clock frequencies, and again, you're on that AM4 socket. You can upgrade down the road depending on the chipset, depending on your motherboard. Check your BIOS up, check the BIOS update launches or rollouts, and see if you could update your BIOS microcode to support a Ryzen 5000 series CPU, or better yet, even a Ryzen 3000 series CPU. Because upgrading to a 3800X would still provide you with about 5 to 10% IPC uplift over the 2600, and then the fastest gaming CPU for your money over at AMD is going to go to the Ryzen 9 5900X if that is what you are interested in. And Cliff says, I'm looking at a laptop for the wife with a Ryzen 5 4600H. Nice. What price category is that in? I want to say that's a probably $700 to $800 price range. And Last Right says, my buddy got the 5900X and I got the 5900X, and we score almost identical single core scores. 12 cores is a wonderful balance and a great deal for the money. I 100% agree with you. The 5900X is the one. Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the 10900K, which even now is about $500 to $550, it's still very much an expensive CPU. As we segue over to the pros and cons to going with Intel, uh, it's neck and neck in terms of price with the 5900X, but the 5900X is faster, right? And this is why right now going with AMD, if you want the fastest possible gaming CPU, as Last Rights mentioned, 12 cores is a healthy balance. It's a wonderful balance, as Last Rights says, a wonderful balance and a great deal for the money. It's high. It is in an enthusiast price tier, but it is good value for your money, all things considered, and what you're getting in that complete package. So those are my 3 AMD recommendations. And again, if you're interested, if you're here on the replay and you're interested in learning more about these CPUs, bounce up. If for you it's up, for y'all it's down, but bounce up to the description box, aka the basement, and read more about these products and more over on their product pages. Now, speaking of Intel, let's segue over to the pros and cons to going with Intel. Ooh, Team Blue, because there are certainly some pros and cons to going with Intel as well. I will honestly admit the Intel content normally doesn't favor as well as the AMD content here on the channel, but again, I go for what's important, what's meaningful, and what's helpful and informative to the community, not what I like necessarily. And to be very clear, I like what AMD is doing with their Zen architecture, and hopefully Intel can provide a viable response here with Alder Lake. I'm not going to talk about Alder Lake again too much, y'all, because it is coming up in the second half here of 2021 allegedly, and there's going to be some interesting changes to how Intel does their fabrication process. Okay. Last Right says, I'm sorry, Cliff says the Lenovo Legion 5 with the Ryzen 5 4600 with 1650 Ti. Whoa, okay, wow, that's not bad. Is $699. That's a great bargain, great value for your money, and a great laptop, even for a power user on the go with a dedicated GPU. Last Right says, are you closer to Rockville or Parkville Micro Center? We're so lucky we got 2 Micro Centers near us, right? So, which one did we go to, Mrs. Mott? Parkville. Okay, so I'm closer to the Parkville Micro Center, but I've been to the Rockville one too because they're not that far away between each other, ironically. But you're right, we have 2, and it's weird because let me switch back here because the only other Micro Center closest to me is going to Philadelphia, going to PA. And so there's 2 closer that way than there is just one going up that way. And then I would have to like branch out to New Jersey or something to that extent. I really wish there was one by the Christiana Mall area. It's one of the largest shopping districts in that's closest to my state over in Delaware, or my neighboring state, Delaware, the first state where I was not born, but I was raised in Wilmington, Delaware. But the Parkville Micro Center, that is my Micro Center. That's the one I go to, and it's under 45 minutes away, under an hour. It's a nice little drive. We grab coffee. Mrs. Mine likes to hit the Old Navy down that way. It's good stuff. But yeah, so the Parkville, or is it Parkville or Rockville? This is my Parkville, Parkville. That's my Micro Center. But in the Parkville one, they just redid when I went for the mini ITX build. Uh, they redid it, and they're actually starting to modernize the outside a little bit more. So that's interesting too. And Mrs. Ma said, "I love the HP laptop. That's what I have. What does she need it for? Business or casual work?" And Mrs. Mod has a 10th generation, I believe it's an i5, or yeah, i5 11th generation i5 in her HP laptop, which I tend to borrow and use more as I'm undecided on which laptop I want to go with for my on-the-go needs. Cliff says, I think I did good for $300 on my 10900K, and that baby runs 5.4 gigahertz on all cores. Yes, absolutely, because the 10900K still now is it's gone back up, and you have to get it for about $500 to $520 if you're lucky. Maybe you can find a deal over on the secondhand market, in the largest secondhand market, eBay. But they're not that price point anymore. So definitely, that's insane value for money over on Team Blue side. And one of the cons, I believe, or pros that we're going to talk about as we segue back over here into the benefits or the pros and cons going with Team Blue, aka Intel. But 5.4 gigahertz, all cores, all 10 cores, is incredible. Incredible, good stuff. And Cliff says, nope, just home use and light gaming. And Last Right says, same, I'm close to Parkville also. Wow, nice. We might have to link up one time, Last Rights. I go, impulsively down to Micro Center, like if I need a component or if I'm trying to help service someone else's or business's computer, I'll just run there. But I do want to do a dedicated vlog video going to Micro Center when I need to do a large haul of parts, maybe like 2 or 3 or 4 or more parts. Slash Right says only 25 in the country and we got 2 in Maryland, right? We are lucky Marylanders, right? Shout out to us here in Maryland. And Cliff says, honestly, Mrs. Mod, her iPod is good enough for her mostly, but she does like Diablo and Diablo 4 and Diablo 2 remake. I think that's 4. I'm horrible with my Roman numerals. I have a cheat sheet. I have a Roman numeral cheat sheet somewhere. I did. It's over there. It's way over there. I used it when I was developing games. And Diablo 2 remake has her wanting to play, and we could play together. Yeah, definitely. The tablet definitely won't get that done. So, and TMZ says, I gotta drive 4 hours to Micro Center. That's right. TMZ shared that with us. TMZ says I gotta drive 4 hours to Micro Center. That sucks. I remember you shared that with us on the last live show. Told you, grab some popcorn. Grab some grab some coffee or something, man. Wow, holy smokes. I told you guys, a 4-hour trip. If I traveled 4 hours anywhere from my current location, that puts me maybe in like Massachusetts, somewhere up there, like a little past New York as a state, somewhere like Mass or Rhode Island, something like that. Still not far enough down south. It's about 12 hours, something like that, from here to Georgia. But 4 hours, that sucks. I'd make it a movie every time I go. You would have to, with it being a 4-hour commute. That's an 8-hour total, and that's not even including the time at the Micro Center or traffic and things like that. But that's an all-day event. Cliff said you should have stocked up when they were on sale, Lab. I know. I was indecisive, and at the time I was reading conflicting reports on 12th gen, but it doesn't matter, and I'm gonna talk about that in my Alder Lake video, because 11th generation is less than 6 months old. And that LGA 1200 socket still has a long lifespan ahead of it. With that being, should prices drop even further on the 10900K like they did with this 9900K, when I tweeted you back on Twitter and I was like, yeah, that 9900K is looking at me with the side eye, because it's like, do something with me, Lab. Sell me, use me, test me, find out if there's still value in this bad boy sitting here in the box. And I just like the 10900K at the time, I saw this for $300, and I was like, $300 for 9900K? Let me jump on that, especially when they were still about $30-$40 more in a Micro Center. Still incredible value for your money on an 8-core 16-thread 9th gen Intel CPU that could also achieve boost clock frequencies of up to 5.2 gigahertz or on a single core, and even a little bit further, or 5 gigahertz, between 5 and 5.1 gigahertz on a single core, and maybe even a little faster with a manual overclock and a beefy cooling solution. But yeah, absolutely, I should have. And don't worry, if I see it happen again, I still very much could. If the workflow needed 10 or more cores, and I'm not going to share too much into it because it goes a little bit in that part of the conversation dives deeper into the mini ITX, the part two, if you will, the next small form factor build I do with the Lian Li TU-150. That's going to be a journey. You guys are going to love that. And if you haven't yet, first of all, give this stream a like. And if you are new here on the stream and you're just now joining us, hopefully I am entertaining or educational enough to have earned your subscription throughout the duration of this live show. But you are definitely going to want to subscribe for that video or for that series, because we are going to take it next level. Everything that, say, I didn't mention in the 5800X and RTX 3060 small form factor build, that mini ITX build, I'm going to try to cover in this build. With that video though, there were a lot of moments that I wanted to share with the community or with the audience with that machine, and exiting the stages of, say, conceptualization to setup and preparation. Like, that whole entire journey was a journey, and I wanted to share some of the key moments. So it is, again, one of the longest videos I've produced on this channel. If you haven't yet seen it, I highly recommend you give it a watch. It's a 40+ minute banger long video. I really like the opening. I tried something. I did experiment with the editing, just to give you a little behind the scenes deets on that video. I did experiment with the editing a little bit, and even with the opening, as I wanted to, with videos that are more impactful and that are grand like build videos are, I kind of wanted to open up a little bit differently, pushing the narrative and the story of that build. So yeah, great stuff if you haven't seen it yet. And let me see. Oh, and last right said to Cliff, Diablo, bro. Heck yeah, I'm a Diablo fanatic. Diablo, I missed out on Diablo phase, and I didn't play it because at the time, when it was at its height, when it was super popular, I wasn't into monitor gaming. We couldn't afford a gaming PC. So by the time I got older, I just shifted away from games like that. But I've read and seen nothing but good things about Diablo. I may need to jump into it because we're going to. I've said this before. I've said it in private, and I said it in the Discord. I've said it on live shows, but when the channel memberships launch, there are going to be segments where you will be able to game with me, game with other members of the community, and I take your recommendations. It's not about what I want to play. It's going to be about what you guys and gals want to play. If it's Diablo, I install and play Diablo with our members that are on that tier. If it's Fortnite, I keep saying Fortnite because I really hope some of you want to play Fortnite. I'm super cash with Fortnite, but hopefully it's Fortnite. You guys and gals want to play Fortnite. If it's Warzone, doesn't matter what the game is. We're going to play it together, and channel memberships, members who are a part of the Inside the Lab membership program, of course, you will be able to make those recommendations. You will be able to decide the type of games we play as essentially one large online family. That's why I see this community, an online family. We all have similar aspirations and goals within our hardware that we want to accomplish, and we all share in this ideology of inclusion. No matter what your system is, how much it costs, you are a PC gamer. You can be an enthusiast regardless of your budget, right? That could come off as a statement that's heavily opinion based, but I stand by it. Okay. And Cliff says, I'm a ARPG fanatic. I play them all. I will be on Diablo 2 R beta this month. And TMZ LOL. Last Right says, I'm super excited for DTR. Yes, and Lost Ark, but I played D3 still and Last Epoch. And Last Right says to me, yeah, I caught that $299 deal as well. They even knocked another $20 off if you bought a motherboard with it. That was a nice deal. Oh, yeah, absolutely. With the 9900K, are you referring to the 9900K? Absolutely. If you could take advantage of bundle deals, especially at a Micro Center, definitely take advantage of it. Jump onto it. Even if you don't need that motherboard, there could be some resale value. There's typically resale value on all functioning components, so long as it functions as it does from a manufacturer's perspective. Then there is resale value in that. So if you can save some money off of getting a CPU as a bundle and still very much take that motherboard and flip it over on the used market or on the secondhand market, that's just more money in the bank, more savings that you're getting off of flipping your parts and making that upgrade one that's easier to sustain, or putting that money towards, say, a pot for your graphics card, right? Like maybe you got a savings going on to upgrade to your graphics card, which I'm starting to see stock improve. I saw I'm not going to say what the graphics card is because I would like to save it for another unboxing video if I pull the trigger on it, but I'm starting to see a particular graphics card that was really hard to find that's becoming more and more available at MSRP. And if you can get to a Micro Center, chances are they have more stock than what's indicated online. When I went there to pick up what I needed for that mini ITX build video, the gentleman told me, "Oh, we got RTX 3080 Ti's in the back." I'm like, "Wow, I didn't see any online," but not surprised there, and they weren't on the showroom floor. So they're always hiding the good stuff in the back. But awesome stuff. And TMZ says nice. Yeah, referring to last Right's deal. That was a nice deal, most definitely. But let's switch back over here on the subject of AMD. So we're going to dive in and talk about the pros and cons really fast here with going with Intel. Starting with the first three is that, just like we were discussing with the 9900K and the 10900K, Intel CPUs tend to age better, right? They tend to age better in terms of their price to performance, and they hold better value, especially higher resale value. We just mentioned the 9900K selling for $299, and the performance you're getting at that price point, right? Slightly faster than a 3800X, slightly slower than a 3800X, but costs less than a 3800X. High clock speeds, strong IPC. Intel CPUs typically tend to age better. This is why you see a lot of, say, Haswell and Broadwell and 8600Ks and 9600Ks over on the used market still selling for a decent price, to where after you've already used up all of the value, depending on what the CPU is and how much you can sell it for, you're looking at maybe losing out on 40 to 50% of that, what it costs you to extract that value. So if the CPU costs you 500, you use it for about 12 or 14 months, 16 months, let's say 18 months, and you're ready to upgrade to, say, the next fastest CPU that's supported on that socket. You take that $500 CPU, you can sell it for about $250 to $300. That, look at that price difference and all of the value you've already extracted out of that CPU, right? About $200 worth. You've used up that value and you're able to recoup some of it back. That's almost like equity, if you will. You're not getting back what you paid for the CPU quite naturally, but what you were able to get out of it in terms of use, that is what you're essentially deducting from that cost or from that upgrade. So that upgrade could cost you out of pocket, say, $300 for more performance, and you've passed that value down on to somebody else. It's a beautiful transaction, in my honest opinion. You may or may not have heard the old adage, one person's gold is another person's treasure. Your value lost is somebody else's value gained. They may not need a 10900K. Maybe your workflow calls for a 10900K. Maybe they started out on an i5 10600K, right? The 6-core 12-thread CPU. And now they're ready to, up the performance, up the core counts, slightly faster IPC, higher boost clock frequencies, all that jazz, right? And you're ready to, say, move on past the 10900K. You're passing that value down off to somebody else. Last Right says, or I'm sorry, Cliff says, yes, they are. I was at Micro Center just a couple days ago looking for fittings, and they had a ton of GPUs. I'm so happy. Yes, I'm so happy too. Man, if you don't know, now you know, but if you know, you know why we are excited as enthusiasts, as gamers, as system integrators, right? Like Cliff, and some of you may be as well. Maybe you do this on the side for business reasons, right? Maybe you are like a lot like myself. Right? I build for local gamers and online gamers as well, and help them achieve or overcome their pain points with their system. But GPUs slowly becoming more in stock. It's a beautiful thing. It's something to be happy for. It's something to rejoice over. We talked about it in a pop-up live stream we did, which we got another one scheduled. I say scheduled because y'all don't know when it is, but it is scheduled. But we talked about this in a pop-up live stream, why that is, and to give you the TLW version, Too Long Didn't Watch, or TLDW version, the Too Long Didn't Watch. It essentially boils down to China cracking down on cryptocurrency mining over there in their cities and territories, and that's trickling down to a lot of the larger mining farms having to offload their inventory because it's no longer profitable for them over there in China. China is the largest GPU mining powerhouse, if you will. All the GPU miners are essentially focused in over on that location. And then the second biggest change is the upcoming Ethereum 2.0 update that's going to drastically change the way Ethereum is calculated and the way the transactions are handled. GPU mining is in my wheelhouse, but you can double back and watch that video because we read back the article and talked a lot about the changes that are coming with Ethereum 2.0. Just know that with that update, it's going to make GPU mining obsolete, as miners won't have to, like, GPU power won't even be a requirement, it won't even be a need. GPU mining will essentially become obsolete until maybe it updates again, but Ethereum 2.0 is going to make GPU mining null and void. You won't need GPUs to mine Ethereum 2.0. We talked about this in last week's live show, I believe, as Tricion, is one of our young friends and family, young gentleman over in the Netherlands, he mines Ethereum, and he said he doesn't necessarily agree with it, but we were able to get an alternative perspective from someone who does mine Ethereum, right? And what that update is going to do, because it will drastically change the value of Ethereum 2.0, my understanding of cryptocurrency. I don't mind cryptocurrency. Y'all know my stance on it. I don't do it. Excuse me. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? I believe that with all things considered, what we've gone through with the 2020 and 2021 tech-demic, that it is up to the, AMD and NVIDIA to meet the consumer needs or the consumer demands for both consumer groups. I'm not mad at miners. I don't believe miners are mad at PC gamers or DIY enthusiasts. They had a higher demand for the GPUs because it was profitable for them to use them. And so they bought up a lot in large stock or large quantities. And so this is what gave the illusion that there were simply not enough new graphics cards to go around. If you had one mining farm buying up to $100 to $200 GPUs at each time they were restocked, then that would definitely give you the illusion that they're always out of stock, as there's so many GPU miners and cryptocurrencies miners. Which, speaking of Tricion, I see just came right into the conversation, talking about Ethereum 2.0. Tricion's clarifying, says, I totally agree with the Ethereum 2.0 merge. It's just unfortunate for miners. And that's the duality behind it, to where it's unfortunate for the miners, but it's fortunate for the PC gamers. And that's the side that we're on. And I totally understand and get the inconvenience that it's presenting to Ethereum miners. After I read into it a little bit, I don't mind. I'm uninterested in GPU mining, so I didn't put much stock into it, but I did want to see how it will drastically affect and change the market. And that's the one upside to it, to where GPU miners won't rely on, say, RTX 2060s, 5700 XTs, and RTX 3060s, GTX 1060, some of the most sought after mid-tier level GPUs. This is going to free up the inventory on those graphics cards. Now, it's still going to take a little bit of time to manifest and for us to see that reflect over into both market segments, both new and used market segments. So we are likely well on the path of the 6-month to 7-month window that I projected about 2 months ago, to where we will see things start to normalize. And this was before the reports coming in about China cracking down on their GPU miners, that I still made this prediction that we will see GPU stock fully normalized on both markets somewhere early 2022, between March and April of next year. Which, again, RTX 30 series, it's come and gone, y'all. It's come and gone. It's already 11 months old. It's already 11 months old. So remember in last week's live stream where I mentioned, for some of you, depending on where you are in your journey, it could be in your best interest to skip over RTX 30 series lineup of graphics cards if you're truly in the hunt for one, depending on where you were or where you are at in your journey. Because the Super Series came after about 11 months after the 20 series launched, right? And we are right along that same window with the 30 series, with it being about 11 months old. And so we are likely going to see maybe 3080 super variants, 3060 supers variants that are faster than the 3060 and the 3060 Ti, 3070 super, which is faster than the 3070 Ti. Maybe it'll have a little bit more VRAM, who knows. So we very much are going to either see one of those two announcements made: RTX 40,000, RTX 40 series, or RTX 30 Super series. I really think it's going to be the latter and not the former that we're going to see, y'all. Let me jump. All right, let's get caught up really fast here in the chat. That we're going to dive back over into the pros and cons. For those of you just now joining us, let me jump over into the chat, but let me officially welcome you into the live show because I see we had a few people join in. If you just now joined us, welcome to the weekly Inside the Lab Q&A show where we are discussing Intel or AMD for your PC gaming needs in 2021. Which one should be, a viable option for you? If you're just now joining us and you can't stay for the full duration of the live stream, totally understand. I do welcome you to, on your way in or on your way out, hit the like button, get this stream a like for me. And if you haven't yet, hopefully this is the live stream where I am educational enough or informative enough to have earned your subscription. I don't just want you to subscribe because the numbers look great, fam. I hope to have earned every single one of your subscriptions. For those of you who are here present now, and I know you're subscribed to the channel, thank you for being subscribers to the channel, by the way. Hopefully I have earned every single one of your subscriptions. And I continue, and it's twofold, y'all. It's like the act of subscribing, but you also have the luxury of unsubscribing too. And I've lost unsubscribers here recently. I believe last week it was like up to 10 subscribers or something like that, and it bounced right back up. That's the nature of the beast, if you will. But hopefully I've earned your subscription here to the channel. And at any point, if you have any questions about any of the meat and bones or any of the topic that we are going through today, right? Any questions about the topic that we are running through today, please feel free to drop them over in the live chat. There's also a pinned poll at the top of the chat. Let us know, are you using an AMD CPU, are you using an Intel CPU, or are you using no CPU? And you say, hey, I haven't even started my journey yet. I haven't gotten there, lab. I'm trying to make it, and I'm indecisive of my platform. I'm indecisive of what should I do about the GPU situation. I'm indecisive if I even need a GPU, regardless of where you at in your journey. If that's you, feel free to share your pain points here in the chat. We have a lot of helpful and informative members who would love to answer any questions that even I myself miss or are unable to. So, all right, that out the way. Let me get caught up here in the chat, and then we're going to jump back over into the pros and cons to going with an Intel CPU here in 2021. As Cliff says, I have yet to see a 9900K that won't do 5 gigahertz on all cores. As likewise, and I'm sitting here, I'm hoping, I'm actually going to, and don't take this the wrong way, y'all, when I say this, but I'm actually going to try to see if I can kill this CPU. And when I say I'm going to try to kill it, because I may overclock it in an unconventional test bed, trying to push for maybe faster than 5.1 or 5.2 all core. And if it kills the CPU in terms of voltage and heat not properly being managed, then it just dies. But I would like to try to see how far I could push the CPU, fully understanding the situation that it could be in a state of, it clunking out. But we're going to try, we're going to do it. And I tell you what, definitely, I have not forgot about this 9900K. This poor guy has been sitting in the box way too long, and it is screaming to be called upon to see its relevancy here in 2021. I was hoping to see and wanting to see 9900K prices drop a little bit further, or a little bit more over on eBay. If the price for a 9900K can dip below under 250, right? Just like it took the 8700K a while to dip down under 250. If we could see 9900Ks going for about $220, $200 on average over on the used market, that's insane value that I would want to demonstrate what you can go with if you say are able to pick up an 8th or 9th generation Coffee Lake motherboard and or 1151 V2 motherboard, and you're able to come across 9900K at that price point. How good is it? What kind of performance can you expect? And especially at 1080p, how can it also handle certain workflows from streaming to video encoding, all that good stuff? But totally agree, Cliff. I would like to see if it could even do more. Triceon says, oh, yeah, totally agree with the miners. Got caught up there. And Cliff says, I think the demand for gamers is decreasing as well. It was as well, yes, it was hard to get, but if you absolutely had your heart set on one and went out and hustled, you got one. Now, so you are out of the demand chain. True, and I totally concur, and this is why one reason throughout the whole demic situation between now and around this time last year, or about September of last year, if I didn't want to point it out to be all gloom and doom, right? I said it's not all gloom and doom. You have to work harder now more than ever to complete your build, especially if you're trying to shop around and get a good, spend good money on a decent graphics card. You're going to overspend. Chances are extremely high. You're going to overspend on a graphics card unless you can get one, if you're lucky enough to snag one in a lottery, or, come across some that's in stock and you're able to verify the order, purchase, check out, boom, you're good to go. But for the most part, yeah, you had to work and hustle to get one. And as Cliff says, now you are out of the demand chain. And with stocks slowly starting to improve, hopefully the scalpers are also out of the markup chain as well. And we will slowly start to see graphics cards trickle on down on Twitter, which if you're not following me on Twitter, you definitely should over at Inside the Lab YT. But over on Twitter, I've been trying to share, deals that I've come across on graphics cards where I'm seeing them starting to drop down. They're still higher than what they should sell for, but there are signs that it is slowly starting to come down. Remember, we talked about that report from the German retailer a few months ago about how prices have dropped down from about 114% to about 65, 70%. We're starting to see it hover around. They're still higher than they should be, and across the board for both market segments, it's about 50% across the board. And Triceon says to Cliff, I'll never buy any ASIC. Insanely expensive and will become waste after a year or two. Okay, referring to cryptocurrency. And Cliff says, I got some LN2 lab and crank that baby until she screams. Yeah, right. Some liquid nitrogen. I would love to maybe mess around with LN2, but I don't have this space. One day though, of course, one day, because don't stop till you get enough. Can't stop, won't stop. I'm going to continue to do this for as long as humanly possible. So long as my eyes work and my hands work and my ears work, this hustle won't stop. And regardless if it's the 9900K or maybe even the 10900K or the 11900K, would like to definitely try to push an Intel CPU on some LN2. And Trisound says, yeah, they are doing that because those companies want the ASICs out of their farms and cash out. They will all be totally useless soon. Okay, once again referring to cryptocurrency mining. But let's jump back over to the benefits to going with Intel. We were talking about how Intel CPUs, they age better in terms of their price to performance. They still hold value 1 to 2, 3 years, 4 years after they've launched. Even in 8700K right now, if you were able to pick one up at a decent price, especially if it was already bundled with a decent motherboard, right, with a Z series motherboard, an 8700K right now could still very much hold up and get the job done. The pop-up live stream, the CPU, that's what I'm using. I've been like hesitant to update from my base system that I use to create content, although I'm long overdue, and especially with me wanting to up the resolution to 4K. Whoops, did I just purposely leak that? But me wanting to update or upgrade the content over to 4K and just improve the quality, I gotta slowly move away from the 6 core, and maybe not even the 9900K could do it, as I held out for as long as possible. I am still very much using the 8700K and that 1080p, and very much at higher resolutions. It's still fast enough to keep up with most of your modern graphics cards. So still very much a lot of value to be had even in this 8700K, regardless of what I plan to do with it. If I plan on selling it, it's worth about 150 bucks, maybe even 200 bucks, as is right now. So Intel CPUs tend to age better, hold and have higher resale value versus AMD CPUs. They also have strong-ish or stronger IPC performance, but it's slightly slower, especially 11th generation, slightly slower than the 5800X. But previously, what helped give Intel the edge was that games that favor fast single-core performance typically performed either, Intel was trading blows with AMD's latest and greatest, or Intel was able to surpass AMD CPUs by maybe 2 or 3 single-digit frame, and still have enough value to necessitate its cost. But typically, benefits with an Intel CPU definitely does have higher boost clock frequencies, right? Like we were discussing with the 9900K. AMD doesn't have a CPU that can boost up to 5 gigahertz, even with its own PBO technology that's performance precision boost overdrive. I said I was gonna be able to talk this live stream, and I almost made it through without messing up. But PBO and PBO 2.0 doesn't even have the capabilities of pushing up or even on a single core, up to say past 4.7 gigahertz or 4.8 gigahertz. Very much still Intel all the way down to, I believe, even the 9900K was able to do 4.7 gigahertz, and this is about with a CPU that's 5 to 6 years old. So Intel typically has higher boost clock frequencies, which if the IPC is equal and it's looking for an advantage, then it's going to get that with its single core performance and it's in that higher boost clock frequency, which makes Intel CPUs a little bit more appealing to enthusiasts. But like Sparta Rule says, switch to Team Red because this could very much start to change, as the 5800X, I believe, with the right cooling solution, could maybe do 4.8, 4.9. Depending on your settings, as Last Rights mentioned that they had to tweak their settings to get their 5950X to hit those sustained clock speeds, and that could look very different. That could look differently depending on the motherboard that you're using in the BIOS, but the steps will essentially be the same. But with Intel, you have higher single core, you have higher boost clock frequencies, which helps in single core applications that take advantage of single core performance, fast single core performance, like games. That's games especially. And this is something that Intel shines over in terms of AMD's boost clock frequencies, which here with Zen 3 still very much high, right? What they're hitting in terms of, I believe the 5800X during that mini ITX build video was hitting about 4.7 gigahertz on 3 or 4 cores, and this was on an air cooler, and this was with ambient temps somewhere around 80 to 85 degrees C. Right here, I was testing the CPU, and it does get a little hot where I test here. Sorry, excuse me, I had to take a sip. And then one of the other pros or benefits that you could take advantage of going with an Intel CPU is that it's easier to install. So the pins are on the back of AMD CPUs. But like I mentioned earlier in this live stream, the pins are on the actual socket on the motherboard. So if you look at, I have a i7-940 right here. Is essentially the substrate is essentially flat. I guess I should switch the camera, huh? But it's essentially a flat substrate versus the AMD CPU, which had the pins protruding off of the PCB. Now the capacitors are still very much sensitive, and you still very much have to make sure you don't damage them. But I can drop the CPU and like this, and it'd be, well, you can't see, but I'm just dropping it on the table, and it still functions. In fact, I have dropped the CPU, gotten thermal paste under there, you can see, and over on the top, and I could still put this CPU into my LGA 1366 socket, and it'll still work perfectly fine. Now, if I drop that AMD CPU is already a dead CPU, but if I had dropped that CPU that many times, or any Ryzen-based CPU, then it would easily damage, right, causing it to not boot and not load. But Intel CPUs use a retention lever that's a little bit more secure than the retention lever on AM4 socket motherboards, and there's that satisfying crunch you get knowing that the CPU is locked in, it won't move. Removing your cooler, you don't have to worry about pulling the CPU up out of the socket when you're trying to remove a cooler on an Intel CPU. So there's less anxiety and less stress that you have to deal with, and less build errors, right, or human error that can happen with installing your CPU versus, say, installing an AMD CPU, which is one of the reasons why it's a pro to go with Intel, because it's easier to install. The pins are on the socket, right, rather than the CPU. Sparta Rule says switch to Team Red. You should switch to the team. Yeah, Team AMD is doing a lot of things right, especially with its Ryzen 5000 series CPU. And Intel has some catching up to do, if you will. So right now, if your budget called for you, which, as you saw in some of the recommendations I made in terms of the best value and the fastest gaming CPU and the best overall AMD CPU, the value is definitely in Team Red right now. Excuse me, in terms of price to performance and getting the most value for your money. That's definitely over in Team Red right now. And Last Right says, if you got a 5000 series chip, make sure you check out Curve Optimizer if your motherboard supports it in your PBO BIOS settings, higher gains and performance. Nice. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I will check out Curve Optimizer myself and to see if it's worth doing a follow-up dedicated video on, and see if it's more relevant to most users if they're using, say, an enthusiast chipset or an enthusiast Ryzen 5000 series chip. And Triceon says, I will keep that in mind for when I buy the 5600X. Solid CPU choice, Triceon. as it was in my best overall recommendations. I recommended that the Ryzen 5 5600X USD, as I know you're over the Netherlands, but USD, the Ryzen 5 5600X over at Micro Center can be had for about $260 and under $300 on Amazon. That's insane with that IPC uplift, and the strength of those cores on the 5600X is essentially a souped up 9900K more than likely. And last Friday says if you allow, it allows you to adjust voltage for each core individually, and you get higher clocks from better temps by giving each core just enough voltage for your frequency target. Nice. And Cliff says Intel will be the first consumer desktop chip to support DDR5 and PCIe 5.0 with 5.0 M.2 drives coming out early next year. And my goodness, they are 16 gigabits per second. Yeah, and you know what? Again, I was going to talk about it more in my Alder Lake video. And Intel also their motherboards will still very much support DDR4 modules. So it doesn't make DDR4 or your current DDR4 modules obsolete, but DDR5, one of the biggest improvements you're going to get going with DDR4 versus DDR5 is that DDR5 is going to run at a 1.1 minimum voltage requirement, like 1.1 volts, which is about 0.3, 0.4 volts lower than DDR4. So that means higher frequencies, less power, less heat. So that's an insane accomplishment to go from that. I wish CPUs would make that same leap in terms of how much voltage is required to run at high speeds and frequencies. But yeah, if Intel can get Alder Lake right and ready for the second quarter of 2021 here, it's going to be very interesting to see how not only the benefits DDR5 brings, but how efficient Intel's MCM design really is able to communicate with a high-powered, a high-efficiency core, or what those Willow Grove cores, and then the Grace Mount cores, which are power efficiency cores. So it's going to have high-performance cores, power-efficient cores, and we're going to see how that correlates to performance and how well they communicate. It's going to be very interesting. I have my eyes set on Alder Lake, so be on the lookout for that. But with temp and with Alder Lake, and again, this could change as Intel. These pros and cons could change as Intel looks to change, dramatically change their CPU architecture with its upcoming 12th generation Alder Lake, right? Which will be based off of their enhanced FinFET process. So it's 10 nanometers. And again, this has allowed them to go with an MC and multi-chip module design as well between those two different cores, Willow Grove and Grace Mount, which, given the lifespan of the 10th and 11th generation CPUs, again, 11th generation CPUs are less than 4 months old. I believe they came out in like March or April, something like that. It's less than 3 months or 4 months old. I think Alder Lake is going to be targeted toward power users. The article I read also hints at Intel looking to drop a 16-core, 32-thread consumer desktop CPU over on that LGA 1700 socket. So all good stuff, man. I am super hyped to see how they respond, because competition is a beautiful thing, because it brings out the best in both brands, right? It really does. And we get caught up here in the chat, and we're going to mosey right on through here. As Trician says, the 5600 is like 270 euro, while the 2700 is 265 euro. I might even sell my spare 2700X for 150 and buy another 5700X to mine with. Yeah, if you got one sitting around, bro, definitely do it, Trician. Turn some of that over, flip some of that into absorbing the cost, or like you said, have another 5600X to mine on. And Cliff says, I'm going to grab DDR5 with the PCIe 5.0 SSD at 2 terabyte. Ooh, just like with that flame, that is extra spicy, bro. That's a good look, though. Yeah, when I see a DDR5 kit that's worth purchasing, or hey, brands, if you're watching, send your boy Lab one. I got to start putting the PO box in the description box, so you guys and gals will see that. For those of you who want to, send me hate mail or send me love mail, whatever you want to do. I'll open it and I'll read it. But I want to grab a kit too, of course, with some PCIe 5.0. With a PCIe 5.0 SSD, would love to see what those read and write speeds are like with that improved bandwidth. But let's switch back over here. We wrapped up with the pros to going with Intel CPU. They age better, have higher resale value, also have higher boost clock frequencies on the core, right? That's not overclocking, just using their turbo technology. The 8700K could boost up to 4.7 gigahertz on a single core or 2 cores. The 9900K was able to boost up to 5.5 gigahertz, and the 10900K 5.1 on a single core. So Intel CPUs tend to have higher boost clock frequencies, also have higher rooms for overclocking for enthusiasts who are looking to overclock, and they're also easier to install with its LGA design and the pins being on the motherboard and its retention socket being much more robust than AMD's. So there's less user error involved with the build process, and you don't have to worry about as much. You line up the triangle on the CPU as you see here in our illustration with the triangle on the motherboard, gently drop it in the socket, pull the retention clip back. You're going to feel that satisfying sound of the CPU being fastened inside of the socket, and drop your thermal paste on your CPU cooler. Boom, you're good to go. Tricean says, I wonder how much better it will be in games. The 5600X versus your 2700X? Is that what you're referring to, Tricean? Do let us know. But going by AMD's own words, I mean, the Ryzen 5000 series, the 5600X, is about 19 to 20% faster than a 3600X. So maybe about 25% performance uplift over a 2700X. Oh, okay, he said no, DDR5 and PCIe 5. Well, DDR5 is going to offer twice the bandwidth, lower voltages, higher frequencies. PCIe 5.0 is going to offer about the same, some of the same level of performance, switching over with higher bandwidth for faster read and write speeds. How much faster remains to be seen, but that's just from some of my early research. Again, I have a dedicated video coming out on DDR5 and PCIe 5.0. Because yeah, it sounds good on paper, but we also have to make sure Intel is able to deliver on those promises. But let's switch over here to talked about the pros. Let's talk about the cons now to going with Intel. For starters, Intel has a slightly higher TDP. I'm not even going to say slightly, it is much higher. Intel CPUs have a higher TDP, which is your thermal how much heat your CPU generates under a full load, right? Which is converted over into wattage, or it's wattage and then heat. Now, Intel CPUs aren't advertised with their boost clocks, which is, I don't know, Intel should maybe reconsider that with 12th generation Alder Lake. Their TDPs, they're not rated off of their boost clock frequencies. So they're typically higher than what you're seeing as advertised from Intel. AMD, not so much, although it's slightly higher than even what they advertise. But they generally tell you it's usually closer. And with that slightly higher TDP comes with a investment in a decent cooler, because especially over on 10th generation i5 and up, their CPUs don't come with a CPU cooler. So with that higher TDP, to really take advantage of those high boost clock frequencies, or your CPU being able to turbo up to its maximum frequency, you're going to want to add to that initial investment. You're going to have to add to that initial investment, unless you're going with an i3 and you're okay with the stock cooler. You're going to have to add at least $50 to $100 for an aftermarket AIO or an aftermarket air cooler, something like the Be Quiet Dark Series Pro, or even higher, depending on if it's an i5, if it's the 6-core, if it's the 8-core 10700K, or if it's the 10-core 10900K. It really could depend on what it is you're trying to cool. Tricean says, yeah, it sounds great, but we'll see. I'm totally with you, fam. I'm totally with you. I'm in the same space. It sounds great on paper, but really have to see how Intel is able to actually execute those technologies, as even smart access memory and fidelity super resolution FSR is having a slow rollout. But it did pick up, so we'll see where it stands at. And WASD Cliff says 5.3 single core out of box on a 10900K. Wowzers. And switching back, and this is one of the many pros, as we double back, that you get with going with Intel CPU, and that, yeah, you could take advantage of those higher boost clock frequencies out of the box without you having to either even touch any of the settings in the BIOS. So long as you have the proper cooling apparatus, your CPU will boost it to as high as it could. It will boost as high as it could. Bad Habit is in the house. It's good to see you, Bad Habit. Bad Habit says, hello, everyone. Looks like AMD for the win in the poll, right? And I see half the poll, and all I see is AMD 100%. So, yeah, it looks like AMD for the win, definitely. Here in this community, we all have a soft spot for what AMD is doing. Guys like Cliff and even myself, we want Intel to do better. right? I want AMD to continue to excel in their architecture, continue to develop new technologies, achieve new possibilities with their lineup of CPUs. Totally rooting for them in that regard. I'm even rooting for their graphics division even more over there on the Radeon side. I really would like to see them, move the bar a little bit further and truly compete with Nvidia. Dr. Elo, yo, what's up? It's good to see you, brother. Dr. Elo says, yo, what's up, cuz? What's up, fam? Another Marylander in the house, or, close to Maryland. It's good to see you, Dr. Elo. Another creator in the house. Kudos to you, brother. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the stream. It's good to see you, Dr. Elo. And Cliff says, Gen 5 SSDs looking at 16 gigabits per second. Ooh. I mean, that's super fast. And Cliff has been reading up on him. So thanks for sharing that. Um, yeah, that's insane speeds. And so you have to figure out, I mean, you have to consider that maybe loading screens could possibly be a thing in the past here, right? As we move over to and make that shift to PCIe 5.0. We just got PCIe 4.0. It seems like an afterthought. But do keep in mind, DDR5 was supposed to come out when DDR4 did, but it was behind. So motherboard manufacturers have had time to catch up and actually start to develop motherboards that are compatible. Dr. Elo says, yep, I am all Ryzen. That's right. Dr. Elo, I believe Dr. Elo has the 8-core 3700X, I believe, or 3800X last time we discussed Dr. Elo's system. But yeah, a lot of us here in this community, we all love that price, getting the most value for our money, and that is definitely Team Red right now. That was one of the pros we discussed during the AMD segment where we talked about, some of the pros to going with an AMD CPU, and as AMD CPUs typically offer the best value for your money, the best price to performance, the higher value for your dollar. And before we jump back over to the Intel side, I do want to welcome to, if you haven't yet, hit the like button for me on your way in or your way out if you're unable to stay in. If I haven't yet earned your subscription yet, hopefully during this live stream or during this live show, I am informative enough or educational enough to have earned your subscription. Dr. Elo says, yep, the 3700X indeed. That CPU I'm seeing for under $250. Another CPU that has incredible value for your money if you're not in need for the latest and greatest, like the 10700K or the 11700K or the 11900K, and you want something slightly modern or newer than a 9900K. As Dr. Elo testifies, it says it's great for streaming. It's amazing. That's a great 8-core CPU for streaming, right? With a boost clock up to like 4.2, 4.3 gigahertz, maybe even more, right? Maybe even more depending on your cooling solution. But absolutely, totally agree. It's a great CPU for gaming, for productivity, for getting a job done in your workflows. But we're on the subject of Intel, and the first con we talked about was Intel CPUs typically have a higher TDP, so this means you need to invest in a robust cooling solution, somewhere adding about $50 to $100 to your initial investment. But when you're going with an AMD CPU, one of the biggest pros to going with an AMD CPU is that your CPU comes with a stock cooler, right? Not the higher end SKUs like the 5800X on up. Excuse me, but the Ryzen 5s, 3s, and 7s, especially from the prior generations, all come with CPU coolers that could really help save you money or allow you to put that money in other places, say with faster storage, with an NVMe M.2, right? Instead of a 500 gigabyte SSD, maybe you save somewhere 50 to 60 bucks in other areas of your build, and now you're able to go with a 1 terabyte NVMe M.2 versus a standard SSD, which is going to net you slightly faster boot times, load times, and overall system responsiveness. But one of the other cons to going with an Intel CPU is that there's a higher cost premium at launch with slower price drops, right? If you look at the 10900K, for example, like Cliff mentioned, Cliff was able to pick up his 10900K, which is a 10-core, 20-thread Intel CPU, for about $300. I checked before the live stream, the 10900K, still very much going for about what it did at launch, which was about around this time last year. So it's almost a year old, and it's still selling for what it did at launch. The 5800X isn't, right? It's about $50 to $60 less than what it did at launch. It's actually an incredible value CPU at its price point at $394. I didn't include it in my recommendations where I said the best overall Ryzen CPU or AMD CPU in 2021 is the 5600X. The best value-centric AMD CPU is the Ryzen 5 2600. And the fastest for gaming is the 5900X. But as a bonus, the 3700 and 3800X they are somewhere right in between there, as even the 3800X is just a hair over 300 USD. So if you ask yourself, hey, if I want to make a splash, say B550 motherboard, 3800X as my initial investment, and I know I am well within the realm of being able to upgrade to a 16 core 32 thread CPU down the road, you can make that splash, and that costs you, it'd be about $100 less than say going with the alternative 11700K or 10700K, which is about the same price point, which is the 3700X and 3800X is there. It's trading blows depending on the game. It's trading blows with the 10700K. But you have to ask yourself, what position can I be in down the road? Much better position than say going with an Intel CPU because of that higher cost premium. It launches at a super premium, like the 10900K was close to $600 when it launched. MSRP is about $549, give or take. The 9900K, same thing. It was an expensive CPU. It was over $500. It just now started to see the price drop down, but that took about 2 generations for that to happen. So you figure when 12th generation, when Alder Lake starts to circulate the market, when 12th gen Alder Lake starts to circulate the market, we could see price drops a little bit further on the 9900K, and maybe even on the 10th generation side as well. We will have to see how that manifests, but Triceon says it's a great CPU. Absolutely. It's a great CPU. 3700X, 3800X, they are super underrated as 8-core 16-thread options, especially at their current price points. Again, I see 3700Xs for under 260, 270. If you needed 8 cores, like if your workload required you to utilize more than 4, 5, or 6 cores, then the 3700X can be the better price, to be the better value for your money option, right? You're going to get more price to performance out of that CPU versus the 6-core 12-thread alternative. If in that case, paying the extra $30 to $40 for those cores could be money well spent to help you improve your workflow, to expedite the process of creating content, up the quality in your games, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, making that an extra initial investment. Especially if you could say, hey, I can get a 3700X, not need a cooler, versus say if I buy a 10600K, I still need to buy a cooler, and I'm going to spend more money by doing that. Nope, I need that. I need those extra 2 cores and 4 threads, right? I want to stream, like Dr. Elo says, I stream. I want to play some games. I also want to, for my podcast or for my live show, having more cores definitely helps, especially if you want to stream games. Dr. Lil says, I've never been a fan of stock cooling, to be honest. I have to overdo it when it comes to cooling solutions. And you know what? And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that, especially if your CPU could benefit from that cooling, from going all out with your cooling solution. Not say buying a 10900 or an i5 10600 and you go get a 240 millimeter AIO, right? That wouldn't be money well spent. But if you have an unlocked CPU like the 3700X or the 3800X or a K-base Intel CPU, investing in a going all out on your CPU cooler can almost certainly just help the overall health and condition of your system. Really take advantage of the CPU because heat is your PC's worst enemy. So having a well-rounded cooling solution can help your CPU take full advantage of the overhead that it's being presented with. Right? Most CPUs can run at about 90, 95 degrees C. The cooler you can keep your CPU, not only will the longer it'll run, but also the faster it'll run, the longer you can keep your CPU cool. Last Friday says every day is a every day is a holiday. Hey, as you know what I say, better live than dead. People say, "How you doing?" I say, "It's better live than dead." Fortunate, right? But you're right. Every day is a holiday, especially as PC enthusiasts, y'all. Come on now. Every time you sit down, whether you're a content creator like Dr. Elo or Triceon or your system integrator, doesn't matter what you do. You sit down, you wake your PC up. You're getting ready to spend. It's getting ready to be time well spent with your hardware, your device, right? But all good stuff, man. Thanks for sharing. I tell you what, we're going to switch right back over here as one of the other benefits with the premium cost at launch. And that's just something, if you're willing to pay the premium, by all means. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your money. I'm telling you how to better spend your money. And if you're willing to pay for that premium, then by all means go for it, because there usually comes some caveats to paying for that premium. Either you're getting newer technologies, like we were just discussing with 12th generation Alder Lake with DDR4 5 and PCIe 5. If you're willing to pay that premium for the say 12900K, it's likely going to be, or the 12700K, then by all means go for it. Just keep in mind that you will have to make other initial system investments to compensate for that higher premium. It's much like buying a super fast graphics card. If that's something you want to do, go for it. But one of the other biggest gripes and complaints about Intel is that its socket lifespan. And you typically only get about 2 generations out of your Intel motherboard, right? We saw this with 6th and 7th generation. Then you had to buy a new, 100 and 200 series chipsets. Then you had to buy a new motherboard with the 8th and 9th generation, more so because every time Intel does this, they're changing the pin alignment on the socket of the motherboard, and they're usually activating like pins that aren't being used for extra power delivery to accommodate for more cores in a CPU. For example, going from the 6-core 12-thread or 4-core 8-thread 7700K to the 6-core 12-thread 8700K requires you to shift over to a new motherboard. Same socket, although it was revised in version 2. And then 8th and 9th generation CPUs supported that 1151 V2 socket. And then if you wanted to get a 10th and 11th generation motherboard, you had to switch over and invest in an LGA 1200 motherboard. So that required you to get another motherboard. So typically, Intel only supports their sockets for about 2 generations. This has been the case for the past 5 to 6, 7th generation of CPUs. So much like Last Rights had mentioned earlier in this live show, Last Rights says try to invest in or get the fastest possible CPU within that generation. This is going to make that every 2 CPU generation upgrade a slightly less impactful one on your wallet, aka your budget, right? If you're able to go all in and say, hey, I bought a LGA 1200 series motherboard or a Z590 motherboard and a 10900K, because that's the highest core count CPU you can get on that chipset. But you could also opt out to say a 11900K should you want to upgrade your CPU for a slightly more performance, although that would almost be like a side grade, if you will, because that 10900K, that's a B CPU, especially if you can overclock it, right? But Intel CPUs don't have a long socket lifespan. Like what we're seeing in the AM4 socket, y'all, it's essentially unprecedented because it's been supported. All of the AM4 motherboards, for the most part, the budget ones aside, support the newer CPUs with a BIOS update, right? X370's motherboard, depending on what motherboard it is, can support a 3700X and in some cases a Ryzen 5000 series motherboard. The AM4 Pro B350 motherboard I have, it's in my son's computer, or the computer my kids use, and I had shot, record, edited that video and just didn't publish it because the GPU tectonic was at its height, and it really made the topic of that video kind of obsolete because there's a lot of used price to performance being featured in that video. But the ASRock B350 motherboard, the B350 Pro 4 motherboard, that motherboard has support for Ryzen 5000 series CPUs up to the 5950X, which is insane because that motherboard can be had on the used market for about $50 to $60 right now. So if it has the right BIOS update code, that socket is better supported than, say, going with an Intel socket that you know it's going to be about a 2-generation commitment. You're going to have to upgrade your motherboard to a whole nother motherboard to enjoy Intel's latest and greatest. If you're outside of the 2-generation upgrade cycle, that 10th and 11th generation being an LGA 1200 socket, which is a relatively new socket in my opinion, which we're going to talk about it here in the third and final segment, that there's still plenty of lifespan left at that socket. If you look at the 11700K, it's less than 6 months old, right? But still selling very close to that premium we talked about with its launch. And you look at, say, the AM4 socket, the 5800X outshines the 11700K in both tests. Single thread, I'll say most tests because that's gaming as well, but in single threaded, which is essentially a gaming like workload, in single threaded and multi-threaded scores respectively, and they are about the same cost. And the 5800X surpasses the 11700K. You have a much further upgrade path or life cycle on the AM4 socket than Intel's LGA 1200 socket. If you're looking for a CPU with more than 10 cores. Rumor has it again, but you guys know how I am about rumors. A rumor is a rumor until proven otherwise. But rumor has it Intel is looking to bring 16 core 32 thread CPUs over on 12th generation Alder Lake. So that could very much change, as they could look to very much also compete with AMD's 5950X and 5900X. Now, what does that do to the X299 chipset? We'll have to see, because I think X299 has a weird place in all of this, with consumer grade CPUs getting such high core counts over there on that level. When by my level, I mean at their price points. So those are the cons to going with Intel. Again, higher TDP, right? So you need to invest in a beefy cooler, because the i5s don't, the 10th generation i5s and i7s, i9s, of course, all don't come with coolers. Has a higher cost premium at launch, and the sockets only have shoot fly, and the socket only has a 2-generation lifespan. So again, if you're going to go with an Intel CPU, if it's a Z590 motherboard or Z490 chipset motherboard, both chipsets are compatible between each other. The CPUs are both compatible on both 400 and 500 series chipsets. Try to go with your fastest possible CPU that you can, and that way when you're ready to upgrade, it's at least another 2 generations ahead, which we're also going to talk about. But a few of the recommendations for Intel in terms of best overall, I have to give that to the i7-10700K, the 8-core 16-thread CPU at $300, about $319 over on Amazon, and slightly under $300 over on Micro Center. Again, if you can make your way to a Micro Center, please do. Hopefully you're not like, I believe it was TMZ who said they're about 4 hours away from a Micro Center. But if you're getting more than one component, there could be some savings there, because their stuff is typically priced much lower than other online retailers. But that's largely in part because, if you didn't know, Micro Center doesn't ship, so you have to go there. But for best overall, that award goes to the i7-10700K at about $300. Again, it's about on par with the 3700 or 3800X. But if you wanted to go with Team Blue here, if you like some of the other things Intel has going on, the best overall CPU right now on Team Blue would be the 10700K. The best overall, right? The best value centric CPU would be the i5-10600K at $214, which is insane. Again, you have to buy a CPU cooler, but depending on the cooler, you could get a CPU cooler and the CPU and still be under $300 in most cases, depending on what it is you're trying to cool. Or I'm sorry, what it is you want to go with, if that's air or like a 120 millimeter AIO or 140 millimeter AIO, which would run you about the $60 to $80 range, or an air cooler, a quality air cooler, even like the Hyper 212 Black Edition, which is about a $44 to $45 air cooler. But the 10600K, I have to give that award over on Team Blue, is the best value-centric CPU, the best CPU, the CPU that's going to offer you the best price of performance or value for your money over on Team Blue side, as again, you could take advantage of the higher boost clock frequencies, stronger IPC, couple of slightly stronger IPC, and you have the ability to resell that CPU at about $150, I would say $140, $150. Should you be ready to upgrade to a 10900K? If you're on that 10th generation socket, you're on a Z490, Z590 chipset, you have a 10900K 10-core 20-thread as an alternative upgrade path, going from 6 cores to 10 cores. Or if you want performance as your target metric, then you can go from the 6-core 12-thread 10600K to the 11700K or the 11900K, as we segue down, that being the fastest gaming CPU over on Team Blue, their fastest CPU they have to offer for gaming, the i9-11900K. It's about 1 to 2 frames slower than a 5800X, but for in games that super favor strong single core performance, games like Call of Duty Warzone, right? Excuse me, just to name a few. Because I noticed that with Call of Duty Warzone, like single core performance, it could, multi-core, it'll take advantage of more than 4 cores, sure. But man, does Call of Duty Warzone really favor strong single core performance. But for the fastest gaming CPU over on Team Blue, got to give that to the 11900K. I also had to take a sip for the 11900K. But those are my recommendations. And again, you can find the links down to all of these CPUs down in the description box below for my replay viewers. And if you're interested in, going with a CPU that will offer will offer higher resale value and will age a bit better than an AMD CPU, and you're willing to pay that premium, go for it. Go with an AMD CPU. Now, let me see. I don't. Okay, give me 1 second here, y'all. As I see my card here. As we jump over into the third and final segment, and that's the best of both worlds. Sorry, that segue was a little clunky, but for some reason, I swear, Streamlabs deletes some of my material, my content. But it's okay. It's okay. But as we segue over here into the best of both worlds for both AMD and Intel, because remember, I started this stream out by telling you there is essentially no right or wrong answer to this equation. There are essentially benefits, there's pros and cons, as we outlined the majority of them from a method or a way that's easy for you to ingest. Because remember, I want you to take in the information and to be able to process it and walk away and make an informed purchasing decision. So as we segue over here into the third and final segment of the show, and that is going over the pros and cons for both Intel and AMD. For starters, with Intel, right, because essentially both silicon vendors, remember how I referred to them as silicon vendors, both silicon vendors offer multi-core high clock speed CPUs at affordable price points, all the way down to the 6-core 12-thread 10600K, right, which doesn't come with the cooler. Again, it doesn't come with the cooler, or even the i3, right? Yes, we're back into recommending it, the i3 being a viable option with its 4 cores and 8 threads at $119. Still very much strong IPC if you only want to play entry-level games and you have a lower-end graphics card, say like an RX 550 or an RX 560 or GTX 960 or 950 or something along the lines there. As I see Cliff says, I got to run to a customer call later, peeps. Peep Aronis. I thought you said that. I was struggling. Peace out, Cliff. It's good to see you. I appreciate you stopping by, Cliff. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. But yeah, the 4-core 8-thread i3 10100 at $119, it's a mouthful, does come with the stock cooler. So you figure, again, you can invest in, it would seem counterintuitive, by going, say, a 10100, an i3 10100, and a Z enthusiast, and an enthusiast motherboard like the Z400 or Z590 chipset. But being on that chipset would allow you to upgrade from that $119 i3, that 4-core 8-thread CPU, to say a 10600K or 11600K. Save up a few bucks and about $100 more, slightly more performance, right? And you could be in a much better position. But a new socket is on the way with the 12th generation Alder Lake, and there's still being plenty of life left over in the 1200 or the LGA 1200 socket, which again supports up to the 10900K. You would be on a solid upgrade path. So as long as you upgrade and invest in your motherboard, if you're coming from an older platform and you're ready to splash onto a modern platform, but so long as you invest and do the proper research in your motherboard, you have options plenty that should hold you over until 10 nanometer is refined, or at least until we see what Intel is really able to do with its 12th generation Alder Lake. Now over for AMD, right, you have the 5600X, which again, a little over $300, and the Ryzen 5 2600X, which can be had for well under $200. Come with a cooler. You don't have to invest any extra, you don't have to invest much more into your build at its initial cost, and you're on a socket that will give you a much wider upgrade path, right? You may not have a CPU that's going to hold you over as long, but you have a CPU socket that will allow you to keep up with the future at a much better pace, at a much cost-effective pace, versus having to upgrade your motherboard every 2 generations. On that AM4 socket, if that's starting with a 2600, if it's a 500 series motherboard or a 400 series motherboard with the right BIOS update, starting with a 2600 and a B400 or X400 series motherboard could put you in a much lower cost entry, or allowing you to put the extra thought into your graphics card or a better case or other peripherals, right? It doesn't always have to be performance inducing. It can be an aesthetic upgrade as well. Maybe you want to go with a fully modular power supply so you can use custom cables. So being able to save on things like your cooler and your motherboard and still allow you to upgrade staying on that AM4 socket is a huge pro for AMD. Okay, you also have the 5800X that even right now is priced at about $400, even square, $394. And we can't exclude the 3700X at under $300. Again, before the live stream, I saw it at about $259, $269, depending on where you are located and if you have to pay taxes. You may find yourself paying about $300, which is still incredible value for your money, because the 9900Ks have even crept up over and surpassed that even on the used market. You're going to pay a little more than $300 for even a 9900K. Remember, Intel CPUs age a little bit better, so they hold higher resale value. But AM4 also continues to age like fine wine, as that socket supports the near entire family of Ryzen CPUs, again, so long as you have the necessary BIOS updates. But with an entry-level X500 series motherboard, you could splash onto the scene with a highly capable gaming PC with or without a GPU. But plan to keep your CPU for at least 2 to 3 generations. A crucial first step to achieving that goal, or to achieving this goal, is investing in the fastest possible CPU for your money at the planning stage, or much like with Last Rights, which I'm not sure if Last Rights is still here, or like credit to Last Rights, who even added to that and said, try to get the fastest CPU within that generation or your chipset, which could arguably translate to the fastest CPU for your money. Even if you're interested in buying a pre-built, y'all. Even if it's a pre-built, still target a pre-built. Not with the highest amount of RAM, because that's easier to upgrade and add, right? If it comes with 8, you can always upgrade to a faster rated speed, or a kit that maybe has custom heat spreaders. Maybe it has RGB. Nothing wrong with RGB. Wish I had my air horn, but nothing wrong with RGB. Okay? But that step, that crucial first step, starts at the planning stage. Okay? Remember how we talked about research is so important, especially if you're building your own system. It's just as important, if you aren't building your own system, to familiarize yourself as to what is going to go, or what's going to, what the process entails, in case you yourself have to service your system, or you want to make a cost-effective upgrade. Adding another storage, right? Adding in another SSD. Switching over to a higher rated PSU, one that's fully modular. Upgrading your cooling solution. Adding more case fans. Right? Familiarize yourself with the process, and it would make those tasks much easier to perform. And it'll save you the headache of damaging your hardware along the way, and you don't have to spend even more money. So let's jump over into our final thoughts, as that was the synopsis of the best of both worlds with Intel and AMD. But remember how on last week's live stream here, let me bring up our final thoughts card. Remember how on last week's live stream I said that prior proper planning could leave you with a poor performing PC. It's the 6 P's to getting into, or to building a PC. Again, prior proper planning could leave you with a poor performing PC. And the brain, or the component that rationalizes your task and your operations, all start with your CPU. Your needs decide the type, right? And your choice reflects your budget. That investment can be in excess, or it can be modest. It could be the fastest for your money, or the best value for your money. Both Intel and AMD have viable options within both categories, but sticking to those two core factors, budget and needs, you can't go wrong with either team. Okay? Budget and needs are the two biggest factors that should determine which CPU, its core count, clock speed, generation, chipset. It starts with your needs and your budget. And if you start there, you can't go wrong with deciding either of these two teams, or which one is exactly right for your needs. Man, All right. Whew. So that pretty much wraps up the conversation, and I think the ride is slowly coming to an end. But before we do, I just want to jump over in the chat here and give our final salutes and send off our final send off to members of the community and those who were able to come out and support the show today. Cliff, of course, I know Cliff had to leave. If you're still here, do let me know if you're still here as I do these shout outs. But I know Cliff had to go. Dr. Elo, of course, it was good to see you, brother, as always. Tricion, it was good to see you, young fam. Let me scroll up here. Last Rights, it was good hanging out with you, Last Rights. Again, thank you for sharing the content out in your Discord community. Awesome stuff there. Bad Habits. Again, it was pointing out the poll. Yeah, we had 100% AMD CPUs. So everybody who came through and was able to participate in the poll, all pointed out that we're all using AMD CPUs. So we kind of see what worked out for most of everybody's here's basic needs. And their budget and where they started out their PC journey with or with their upgrade. So awesome stuff there. I thank you to everybody who participated in that poll. Let me keep scrolling up here to make sure I didn't forget anybody else. TMZ or the Mrs. Zombified. It was good to see you as always, TMZ. TMZ came through, showing some love on the stream. Let me keep scrolling up here. Thunder, of course, my son. Shout out to Thunder who made it to the stream. And Sparta Rules 1993, Anthony. It was good to see you as well, Anthony. Bad Habit, who's also still on, and Last Rights. Definitely appreciate you guys and you fam for popping on our live stream. So if you haven't yet, stick around for the end credit scene, as I will still very much wait and answer any questions or scroll through the chat. Make sure I didn't miss any comments. If you haven't seen it, it's a pretty cool B-roll from some older content. And if you're just now joining us, I'm sorry, but you are tuning in towards the very end of the show. But don't leave just yet. First, give the stream a like if you haven't yet. If you're just now tuning in, you say, "Holy cow, I forgot to hit that thumb for your boy Lab." But if you haven't yet, hit the like button for me. Even if you're just tuning in, and yeah, we're wrapping up the show, but immediately after the show, I add time chapters to the video, make it a little easier to navigate. So I recommend you jump about 10-15 minutes into the conversation as we really get rocking and rolling and share a lot of helpful information that can help you make an informed decision on your next CPU purchase or your next platform upgrade, whatever that may look like. But Last Rights and Bad Habit, appreciate you guys for hanging out. If you're here on the replay and you made it this far, let us know down in the comment section below, #ReplayFam. And if you have any questions, concerns, or anything that you want to add to the conversation, do be sure to drop it down in the comment section below. We have a lot of helpful tips or a lot of helpful links down in the description box below, the links to all the products mentioned. And of course, if you haven't seen the mini ITX video, yet, I highly recommend you jump over there. If you want more inside the lab and you're like, oh man, I missed the live stream, man, this guy Lab, he's a cool dude. Which if you think that about me, awesome to you, and I think you're cool as well. But if you haven't yet and you want more inside the lab, there it goes. That's the mini ITX build video. I highly recommend you give that video a watch. It's good stuff. It's an amazing journey. But with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and go. Thanks for tuning in for this week's live stream. Oh, it's important to note. Okay, no, we'll probably be on next, depending on what happens this week. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. But I do hope to catch you on the next one. So until then, be easy, keep it safe, keep it clean, and I do hope to catch you all in the next one. I said that backwards, so I'm gonna say it again. Be easy.